Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Please welcome Bob Cohn, President of the Atlantic.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Cohn. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Atlantic's third annual Renewal Summit. Thanks for being here. We're going to have a great morning together. Today's program is the premier event in our Renewal series. That's a project that's taken us across the country over the past 3 years to document and examine the surge of local problem solving that's shaping our nation. One theme we keep encountering, states, cities, and even small towns becoming the new labs of innovation. Perhaps no city better exemplifies this trend than New Orleans, now celebrating its 300th anniversary, and just 12 years after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, the city is becoming a technology hub. Longtime residents are finding new mission, young workers arrive to the city, and expats are returning. Together, they're rebuilding New Orleans and are dreaming up new ways to ensure that everyone benefits from economic growth. So we're gathered today to hear the stories of renewal that are taking place here in this community and across our country, and to discuss what national leaders can learn from local leaders about, getting things done. I'm delighted to say that among our speakers is the mayor of this city, Mitch Landrieu, who just this morning was named the winner of the Kennedy Profile and Courage Award. He'll be up later with my colleague, Atlantic Senior Editor Ron Brownstein. We'll also unveil the winners and the runners-up of this year's Renewal Awards, 10 organizations that are making great strides in their communities. Our judges selected these winners from more than 3,000 entries nationwide. It was a huge task, and they say incredibly gratifying and humbling. We're going to talk more about the awards and hear from the winners also later this morning. First, I want to thank our partner, Allstate, for making possible this event and the Renewal Awards. We at the Atlantic are grateful to Allstate for its collaboration and support over many, many years, and for its vision to celebrate the inspiring acts of renewal that are taking place across the country. Now, before we get started, I mentioned that the Atlantic has been traveling across the country along with Allstate to talk about American renewal. We started 2017 in Washington, D.C. at our second annual Renewal Summit, the event just like this one today, and then we went on to Pittsburgh and Seattle. We heard firsthand about fresh ideas that are being hatched in these cities and how those ideas are changing life on the ground. So I want to take a quick look at some of these highlights from our 2017 Renewal Series.
When our economy tanked, there was no federal bailout for us. We did what Pittsburghers know how to do. We rolled up our sleeves, we went to work, and we solved it.
For the first time in Seattle's history, whether you build a commercial building or a multifamily building like an apartment building, you must contribute to affordable housing.
My name is Zach Swingle. I'm a fishmonger here at the world famous Back Place Fish Market. The market's great, it's home, it's family. Wouldn't want it any other way.
Cities are the center of innovation. They are laboratories for how we face the 21st century, how we solve the energy crisis, how we work on climate change, how we make sure that people are included, how we work on public safety.
If you look at historically where people have been able to move from a lower income class to much higher income class, those places are now too expensive for most people to actually afford. And that's a real problem.
When folks get here and they don't see the diversity, they don't see the culture, they stay for a couple of years and leave. So that's a very, very critical piece that we need to address, because absent that, that's going to stifle our growth.
We've got to fight for the people of our community and do what's right for the people of our community. We can't give in.
All right, so we've learned a lot on these visits, and we really look forward to our travels this year, beginning today in this great city. And now, a few practical notes before we get started. Please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. We'd love for you to join the conversation in social media. We're on Twitter at Atlantic Live, that's one word, and the hashtag is Renewal Awards. We also want you to be part of the conversation here in the room. We'll have time for questions after each session, so please don't be shy and have a question. At the end of our program, we invite you to stay for lunch beginning at noon to celebrate and talk with our Renewal Awards winners. So please stick around for that. And now let's get the conversation rolling. Our first guest, Walter Isaacson, needs little introduction. Walter, the outgoing president of the Aspen Institute, is a New Orleans native who's now back home as a professor of history here at Tulane. Over the years, Walter was the top editor of Time magazine and the chairman and CEO at CNN, before going to run the Aspen Institute, where he has been a great friend and partner to the Atlantic. And Walter is, of course, the best-selling author of Titanic biographies on everyone from Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, to Albert Einstein, Ben Franklin, and Henry Kissinger. And perhaps most important, he got his journalism start right here at the Times-Picayune. When Walter moved back to New Orleans, he said, "America's real creativity and competence seemed to be happening more at the local level. Mayors and governors knew they had to get things done. Potholes have no party." And he added, "I began to believe that one way to counteract the national bitterness and to regain a spirit of American optimism was to get local." So that, Walter, captures the essence of our Renewal series. And clearly there's no better person to kick us off this morning. And here to talk with Walter about getting local and much more is my colleague, Allstate Stewart, contributing editor of The Atlantic.
Hey, thank you. All right. Roberto. Thank you.
Come on down. Good morning, Walter.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. So once you unpacked all your bags and you settled in, what did you realize that you missed, that you didn't realize you missed about New Orleans?
Well, I never fully left New Orleans, meaning my family home is still my family home. I came back a couple years ago and bought a place in the Quarter and went down to City Hall to register to vote, and she said, "Hi, Walter." And she had been there, the person at the register, and said, "Well, you still live on Napoleon Avenue, don't you?" And I said, "Well, no, I've actually been away 20 years." But so I always felt at home, especially since I'd been involved a little bit with the Recovery Authority after the storm. And, do you know what it means to miss New Orleans, besides mispronouncing the name of the city, does convey a real sense of what it's like every time you're away. I mean, every time I'd hear a horn, I'd think of the Algiers Point and the tugboats going around Algiers Point at night and how they blow their horns and the signal. I'd hear that somewhere else, and I'd say, wait, I miss home.
A mutual friend of ours, I'm going to drop a name, so watch your feet. John Meacham, Pulitzer Prize winner John Meacham.
John is coming April 19th. We're doing a big event here for him.
He's a really good friend, and he made a similar move a couple of years ago. Packed up his whole family from New York City and moved back to Tennessee. So I shot him an email a couple of days ago and said I was going to be talking to you. And I asked him why he moved home, and he said this: grass and dogs for us took precedence over asphalt and taxis. We love New York, but as our kids started getting bigger, we realized that we wanted to bring them up in a place with room to run. For us, that is Nashville, and it's been a fabulous move for us. We love our friends here, our house, the kids, the schools, and the Springer Spaniels.
Let me build on that, because there's a general movement happening of which John Meacham is a part, J.D. Vance of Hillbilly Elegy is a part, and it's a movement that we've all talked about some. Donna Brazil was over at my house last night, and she just bought a place really 4 blocks from here on Tchoupitoulas and Julia. And it's those of us who, when we were young, got sort of tapped or yanked by SAT scores or internships with Hale Boggs or whatever it is that yanks you out of your community and brings you to New York or Washington or San Francisco, and then you stay and you stay and you stay. But at a certain point, especially when things are so dysfunctional as they are nationally at the moment, you pause for a moment and say, okay, it's time for us to go home. Mm-hmm. There's been a great divide in America. That divide is not just left and right or liberal conservative or red state or blue state or rural and urban. The divide is between those who left their community, like J.D. Vance did so famously, in Chapter 4 of Hillbilly Elegy. It's between those who left their communities and didn't come back and those who stayed behind. And the resentment sometimes people who stayed behind feel to the coastal elites who left. And so one thing that would be useful is if you don't have a lot more business still to do in Washington, and today it's, with all due respect to where you live, it's harder to do business, go back home and get involved in your school board, your city planning commission, or that sort of thing. I think I see, is that Jason there? Yeah. Jason Williams, our councilman at large, president of the city council, somebody who has been, a stalwart of keeping this city stable for so long, and the ability to go back and say, oh yeah, here's where I grew up, here's where you went to school, and to say, what are we going to do about Canal Street, as we were just talking about 10 minutes ago. Canal Street and the ability to bring it back to being a great international boulevard, that's not a liberal conservative, left, right, Democrat, Republican thing. That's just what happens when people at the local level run into each other.
I often wonder if it's a left, right, liberal, conservative thing. I feel like everybody in this country wants the same thing. You want a roof over your head, you want food for your children, you want a safe country. We all just differ about how we're supposed to do that and get there. How can, on the local level, we find meeting ground when we all do think so differently about how to achieve those very basic things we all want?
I think one thing you have to do is avoid the partisan polarization and poison that has been injected into our political discourse on a national level from happening here, happening on local levels. In other words, when it comes to education, when it comes to the Louisiana legislature being in session, having to figure out, do you do the top scholarships, which is the scholarships to college for kids who need them, to think, okay, what's right and what's wrong? And to avoid, let's say, getting so wrapped up on the gun debate right now that you go for the polar extremes rather than saying, here's what 80% can agree on. And you see it happening, it's mainly at the local city level, you don't have the poison very much, because as I said, potholes don't have parties. At the national level, you do, and you're starting to see North Carolina legislature, Georgia legislature, Texas legislature, people pulling themselves apart at the state legislative level, doing things that I think are unnecessary one way or the other, bathroom bills or whatever. You have to sort of say to your state reps and your state senators, just get things done. Don't try to be on talk radio or be part of this shouting process.
And as citizens, I suppose we should all support that passionate middle.
Yeah, and it's, I do think that there may be at some point a movement towards a sensible center, I mean, I'm comfortable with the word center, but you could be conservative or liberal, but still believe that there's common ground. It doesn't mean giving up all of your principles. I mean, that's Ben Franklin during the Constitutional Convention, when they couldn't agree on the big state, little state issue, he does the compromise. And he says, when we were young tradesmen here in town and we had a joint that didn't hold together, you'd take a little from one side, you'd take a little from another, until you had a joint that held for centuries. So too, we here at this convention must each part with some of our demands. And the point he makes is that compromisers may not make great heroes, but they do make great democracies. And we now have a media and a partisan system and a primary system and everything else that demonizes compromisers.
When you think about the most pressing issue for New Orleans right now, what is it?
I think the most pressing issue is, actually, we were all at dinner. We went around the table on Saturday night. I'll let Jason give his. Mine was equitable economic development. We've had good economic development here in New Orleans. We've had 4 or so pillars of our economy: the Port of New Orleans, the extraction industries, the tourism industries, and in some ways the creative industries, meaning music, et cetera. Some of those naturally tend towards more income inequality, including the hospitality industry, and some, like the port, tend towards a more equal, wages, and they're good jobs at good wages with benefits, et cetera. And I think we have to make sure that the economic growth of New Orleans, which has been quite good, I mean, heavens, I mean, this hotel, this neck of the woods used to be pretty abandoned, and now within this one block, without crossing the street, you can go to Belize, Seaworthy, the restaurant. I mean, there are more restaurants in this block than there used to be in this whole neighborhood. But that it be equitable, that everybody participate in it. And this is particularly true with a group like this. We've just gone through New Orleans Entrepreneurs Week, which is now the 3rd big thing on our cultural calendar. Between Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest, there's Entrepreneurs Week. 20,000 people come down, they pitch for various things. A startup economy can be inclusive or it can be exclusive. And yet it's a conscious choice we have to make to say, if we're going to have a startup economy, everybody's got to have the opportunity to be part of it.
What are the obstacles towards equity? When you talk about it, everybody nods and says yes, 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 and yet it doesn't happen or it doesn't happen fast enough.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of structural impediments to equity. But if I'm at a pitch, not a pitch like this one that's social entrepreneurs, but a pitch like the one I was at 3 or 4 days ago for Entrepreneurs Week, where one group developed on a silicon chip nerves so that drugs can be tested on a chip instead of in animals, things like that. Those people from the very beginning who tend to do well on such pitches tended to have educational opportunities and other things that kids from a nearby zip code may not have had.
Sure.
And I think we have to think in our daily lives each step of the way. How do we start with pre-K, which is probably the next big push we have to do in New Orleans to make sure everybody at age 1 or 2 starts getting a good education? How do we start with that to make sure that by the time you're pitching at a competition in Entrepreneurs Week, you've had at least a decent opportunity?
You're on the Tricentennial Commission. As a historian, why is it important to take time to recognize these big markers? These huge markers.
You mean anniversaries?
Yeah.
Well, the point for New Orleans is the Tricentennial comes just as we've recovered from the hurricane, and we look back and we look forward. So it's a nice inflection point. It's already had some action-forcing events, like not just how do we celebrate, Bienville or something, but what are we going to be as an economy going forward? The very first action-forcing event has become somewhat famous, and you'll hear from Mayor Landrieu later today about it, is he asked me to be the co-chair of the Tricentennial, and he asked Wynton Marsalis to do it. And so Wynton called me up and said, I'll do it if you will, but he said, there's one condition. I said, what's that? He said, you support me on taking down Robert E. Lee. And I said to him, well, maybe. I never thought about that. Man, I drive around that circle 1,000 times, a year, and I never think about who's up there.
You don't have
And
to.
he paused and said, I do.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I get it, you do, and we all should take it down. And we did. But that was an action-forcing event that happened because we had to look at our history, say, what is our history and what represents our history, and who are we? And history is not just a set of old dusty facts that march one damn thing after another. History is about change. Who pushes it? Who resists it? And tearing down Robert E. Lee is about change. Who pushes it? Who resists it? Understanding why Robert E. Lee was put up or why others were put up. And for that matter, in a more complex way, I did write that Andrew Jackson, who stands in Jackson Square, I think that statue should stand, even though I think he was, and with all due respect to your friend Meacham, an odious president and an odious man. But the reason he was put up is because in that very square where his statue is, he mustered the troops in 1814 to fight and win the Battle of New Orleans, and a great diverse group of troops. And so the purpose of that monument was he united us. He saved us as a city. The purpose of Robert E. Lee was, hey, we're in charge again in the 1890s. So I think history helps us make those distinctions.
I want to ask you about the history course you're teaching at Tulane, History of the Digital Revolution from Ada Lovelace to Mark Zuckerberg. How has the internet changed New Orleans?
Well, not quite enough. Other cities, what you're seeing in this country is what Steve Case calls the rise of the rest, meaning it's not just Silicon Valley, but cities like Chattanooga, which, by the way, gave free Wi-Fi to everybody and became an ecosystem for entrepreneurs. Austin, Texas,
St. Louis,
et cetera.
yeah.
St. Louis, even Detroit now, coming back, obviously Pittsburgh. So New Orleans is in the top half of that movement, but not at the very top quintile, let's say. And so I don't know that the internet has a huge impact. I do believe that the next phase of the digital revolution is not about engineers who create coding algorithms, but it's about people who can connect the creative industries to technology. Music, food, life, whatever it may be. And New Orleans is particularly good at doing that, and most of its entrepreneurs are good at doing that. So I think New Orleans is well positioned for the next phase of the digital revolution. And you certainly saw last week in Entrepreneurs Week a lot spouting up on that,
What does it take for an entrepreneur to be successful in New Orleans?
I think that this is a very embracing community for entrepreneurship. It's got more intellectual property, Entrepreneurs Week, Propeller, these incubators and accelerators and startups. What it does not have enough of, but we worked on last week quite a bit, is what I'll call an angel investor community that moves you from the idea to your first or second tier of financing. There's now more venture capitalists, there are good banks here. So we're trying to bring together both inside and then with Jim Coulter from Texas Pacific Group, who is half from New Orleans, we're trying to bring together enough people in angel investing so that you can get financed here.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll look for my folks with the mic, so assume the mic position for the audience. In your previous life, you headed up 2 large news organizations. What's the importance of local news to the future of New Orleans?
Well, you're going to have Terry Baquet, who I just saw walk into the backstage there, explain it. New Orleans is quite unusual, although Terry will not admit this, but it's got a newspaper competition. I mean, there are 2 newspapers here, The Advocate and the Picayune, or NOLA.com and the Advocate Group, which is great because they're both very good and they're both do substantive news. Local news so far has not fallen prey to what my old networks, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox have done, which is go partisan, go. And there's I'm going to get a little technical here, but it's what we talk about in my course. There is, in the digital age, a propensity to go for both clickbait and for engagement. And engagement's a euphemism for the type of story that's going to make you go, oh, shit, this is really bad, and to email it, and to click on it, and to like it, and to share it, and all that. Those are not the type of stories like the Times-Picayune did 2 weeks ago on the receding coastline and how, if you open the Bonacaire spillway versus the Atchafalaya, how you do resedimentation in the marshes. That was a truly wonderful piece, but it wasn't the type of piece, you could probably gotten more clicks if you said, you can't believe the stupid outfit that Stormy Daniels wore last night, and then you get 1 million clicks. So we have a dysfunction in the media now in which it's totally dependent, especially in local news, on advertising. And advertising is now dominated by Facebook and Google, sucking up all your personal information, micro-targeting you, and taking the dollars. So to save local news, we're going to have to get back to a system where there's some consumer revenue for local news. But I love journalism in New Orleans. It's extraordinarily good, much better than any city I've ever been to.
Where are microphone folks? We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. All right. Here's a gentleman back here.
Hey, how you doing? My name's Happy Johnson. Thank you for all of the commitment that you have to New Orleans and the roles that you've played on the Tricentennial Commission and the City Planning Commission. My question is, a few weeks ago we had our city council vote in favor of a gas plant in a predominantly black and Vietnamese community. And as we think about history and change, we often see the role that money plays, even with progressive Democrats, being able to make real change. And so I just was curious if you had
talking
any
about the energy plant in the east?
Yeah, New Orleans East.
Yeah. Look, I've looked at that. I didn't have to vote on it. It was city council, not city planning. But that seemed like a sensible plan, well scaled back from the original plan. And one can argue yes or no. I do think sort of energy shortages at peak times can be a bad problem for a city like this. So my view, knowing the people on the city council and knowing the people involved, is that compromise was done because they thought it was the best thing, not because Entergy has a lot of money. And with all due respect, I think sometimes we think everything that happens is because somebody, behind the curtains has a whole lot of dollars and bribe people. Having spent a lot of time on the city planning, and of course we then have to see what city council does with our things, I am deeply believing that the votes I see are because people think it's the best, not because somebody is corrupting the system. And you may be right, there may be whatever, but I think we have to be a little bit more open to the fact that people can disagree, come to a compromise, and not attribute it all to evil, insidious, dark, dollars being put around. I would have voted the way the council did. I don't think I know anybody other than Rod West at Entergy, and he's never given me a nickel. So I would have voted the same way, and I trust their motives, even if perhaps they didn't get it exactly right.
Let's try for one more question.
Sorry for a hyper-local question there.
I liked it. Anybody want to ask?
But it is true of a national thing, too. We all think, okay, everything done wrong was done because somebody bribed somebody. That's sometimes the case, but not always the case. You've got to make a distinction between when it's the case and when it ain't.
And Walter, last question. Okay. What is a mistake you don't want to see New Orleans make again?
In the 1960s, well, I'll be a historian and go with the 1890s. But it happened again in the 1960s. Let me tell you a story. In the 1890s, late 1880s, let's say, the schools of New Orleans were totally desegregated. There were multiple classes of people in New Orleans. There were Creoles, gens de couleur libres, freed slaves, whites, Italians, Jews, Irish, whatever. The most persecuted group in the 1880s were the Irish. There were more Irish lynched than blacks, whatever. If you went to the schools in this neighborhood, or especially in French Quarter, whatever, they were integrated. If you went just up the block, you got to Storyville, which was a red light district. Lulu White, who was an octoroon, ran Mahogany Hall, the best hall there. And there's a wonderful song called Basin Street Parade that Louis Armstrong played because he was a player there in Storyville, called Where the Light and Dark Folk Meet. And it was a city that was generally racially complicated, but not with a color line. In the 1890s, early 1890s, one of the octoroons from near there, somebody who Lulu White knew, named Homer Plessy, boards the train right down the block at the Press Street station and is told to sit in the colored car because they have passed a Jim Crow law. He says no, and it becomes Plessy v. Ferguson. Suddenly, not only the city, but the whole nation has to draw a color line. You can do your counterfactual history to imagine what would happen if that had gone the other way, and New Orleans, which had a somewhat uncomfortable but still vibrant mix of different classes of society, of different hues and colors and whatever, hadn't decided, let's draw a line between black and white. And we kind of made that mistake again in the 1960s, almost inadvertently, but with school desegregation and sort of the riots and things that were happening in the rest of the country, not here, and then the opening up of the suburbs and FHA loans and the building of interstates, people moved out of the inner city and they moved to outlying areas. And they tended to do it in a segregated way. Whites moved out to Lakeview.
White flight there.
Yeah. African American, middle class, and working class moved to the New Orleans East and Lower 9. And we kind of segregated ourselves. I grew up in Broadmoor, which Mitch writes about in his book, with LaToya Cantrell and Mitch and many others in the same neighborhood. And we kept that neighborhood intact, so it didn't segregate, didn't go white or black. But the rest of the city kind of did. The silver lining on the storm is that those new neighborhoods are the ones that got devastated because they were below sea level. I mean, you know, before 1960, people weren't idiots. They built above sea level, but when they felt they could drain the east and Lakeview and all, they did that. So we have to not make, again, the mistake of doing anything that segregates us, like we did, unfortunately, in 1894 and like we did in the 1960s.
Walter, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Joining Allison on stage, please welcome Terry Beckhay, Director of Community Engagement at NOLA.com and the Picayune. Flozell Daniels Jr., the President and CEO of the Foundation for Louisiana. T. Martin, the co-proprietor of Commander's Palace and the co-chair of the New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute. And Brandon B. Mike Odoms, visual artist at Studio B.
Good morning to everybody. So in doing research for this and reading all kinds of articles, there are countless news reports about New Orleans' resurgence, the big comeback, that was the Atlantic, the improbable and fragile comeback from Forbes. For those of us who aren't from New Orleans, should we believe what we read? Is it true? And if you think it's true, in what way? And if you think it's overstated, tell me that. Terry, I'll start with you.
I get to start. I think a lot of it's true, but I still think we have issues surrounding crime, infrastructure, obviously because of, as evidenced, I should say, by the monuments issue, we have a race problem as well. So, you know, I think we are doing okay, but we've got a lot more work.
Flozell, what do you think?
I think Terry's right. I think the overall numbers tell a story that we're doing well, and in many cases doing better. But when you start to look at the numbers and disaggregate them, you see that people of color, particularly black folk, have made almost no progress, and in some cases are doing worse. And so there really is a break line not just about the race issue by way of our values and our way of thinking about how we feel about being in community with each other, but I believe it's going to be where we decide whether this community can grow and prosper and have another 300 years. If everyone in New Orleans and the surrounding region can't participate in the economy, in the democracy, and in the beautiful culture that has brought folk to this place, I think we're going to struggle.
T, from your point of view as a restaurateur.
Well, I think that things are better than they ever could have been without Katrina. I mean, you hate to have gone to the tragedy and lost the lives, obviously, but the things that have changed would have never changed, a lot of them. The exciting renaissance in the school system, which still needs work, but it's the fastest improving school system, I think there's ever been. So those things are thrilling, and we just need to keep working on it. The restaurant industry is ridiculous. I mean, I said we had too many restaurants before Katrina. It was like 800 and something. Now it's like 1,600 and something. It's just, there's no way to justify that other than that restaurateurs as a group and New Orleanians as a group are both insane. I mean, there's no reasonable explanation for this. So, but ditto what my friends are saying. We got work to do, and I think it's a great place to do it. My biggest fear in life is we're a little tired. A lot of New Orleanians have worked very hard and been wildly engaged in this community.
Right.
But we got to put the pedal to the metal, not let up.
We got work to do, but we like to eat out.
You do work while you're eating out. Make it work out that way. Mike, what do you think?
I feel as though in the context of progress, we're trying to make sure it's not at the expense of the people or at the expense of the culture, at the expense of the least amongst us. And I think that's what we're navigating and fighting hard to preserve, is that with the idea of progress, there aren't exclusions and people aren't left out. And that's something that's been a battle. And so in that lens, I would say there's a lot of work to be done.
It's at that point, Austin, Texas went through this. There used to be a slogan in Austin, keep Austin weird, right? Before Dell came in and started spouting out Delionaires, as they call them down there, and changed a lot of neighborhoods quite a bit. We've talked about progress and preservation. It's the motto of the city. So Terry, how do you do that? How do you think about the future, think about all that means, whilst trying to preserve all that makes New Orleans unique and special?
I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. New Orleans' lure is that it is such a great old city. But, there've been a lot of new folks who've moved in, and they've moved into neighborhoods that, I think, like Walter said, that were sanctuaries for certain people. Treme, when I was growing up, I was born there, not actually in Treme, it was at a hospital, but Treme was a sanctuary for black folks and Creoles of color. And now, because of gentrification, it's changed, and the personality of that neighborhood has changed. And I think that as far as history goes, it's not the same place that I feel close to, because it has changed. And I fear that change makes it vulnerable to what made it great and made it a sanctuary for black folks.
One of the things I saw which sort of crystallized this issue was of the tricentennial merch you can buy, the T-shirts and all, was a tricentennial soy aromatherapy candle.
Yeah, that's right.
And it sold out, which I thought was just an interesting mashup of the issue. And T, I want to ask you about this interview with Savior Magazine. You said with Commander's Palace, you've constantly been changing, and you constantly are evolving the menu and the restaurant, yet it is so iconic to New Orleans. Tell us a little bit about how you go about making these changes while staying true to what Commander's Palace means for the city and for your family.
All right, so New Orleans food has always evolved. You know, what is gumbo? Should we just say this is it, we're never changing it again? That's not how we got where we are. And anybody who says we should take a picture of it, I'm just talking about gumbo, don't get excited. You know what I mean? Anybody who says we should just stop right there and never evolve gumbo, we would never have had speckled belly goose gumbo. We would have never, you know, I think that's fantastic. And I hadn't thought about it the way you're actually asking it, but I mean, we try to hang on. We are respectful of the past, but never reined in by it. You know, and that's how we constantly evolve our food. And in the neighborhoods, I get those changes, and I'm just so damn glad we're talking about gentrification, and everybody's bitching about potholes again. Yay, that's what we're upset about. I mean, you know, the problems were so bad, you know, 10 and 12 years ago. So, but I do think we need to be careful. I think it's thrilling. You ever drive down Royal Street and you see the French Quarter and in the distance are the tall buildings? I think that's exciting. I think the Louvre in the middle of Paris is exciting. I like the contrast. And I think we do need to keep evolving. And, but protect the things we need to protect. I don't know how you protect a certain neighborhood and it never evolves. Every neighborhood I've ever lived in. I say I live in Faubourg St. John when I'm feeling fancy, but it's really just mid-city, and it's just the same. But it has evolved. I mean, you know, so it is tough. But I think New Orleans needs to keep evolving, but try to hang on to respect the things that really matter. But some of it needs to change.
That's the fine line, though. I mean, I don't think that. I think neighborhoods in New Orleans should evolve, but we also have to find a way not to lose the special stuff that makes these neighborhoods great.
Flozell, you said something that I thought was really interesting, and I'm hoping you can give me an example. That as we're all looking forward and we're talking about investing, you said you can't invest in the things that create negative outcomes.
He's so smart. He always says stuff like that. Yeah.
I'm going to send that check to you, T.
What's an example of that here specifically?
Listen, I think cities all across the country struggle with this, right? We think we're doing the right thing. We make public investments in strategies and actions that we think are going to keep us safe, going to help us grow economically. And then we find out those things actually marginalize our own people, potentially limit life outcomes and options for folk in the future. I'll give you a couple of great examples. This neighborhood conversation. I grew up in Uptown, the Ferret neighborhood. It was not as wealthy and as well shaped as it is now, but it was a beautiful place. I really appreciate Terry's word, a sanctuary, right? I was sort of raised by the neighborhood and the people in that neighborhood. As it turns out, New Orleans, people are our best asset. It is the thing that makes us different from anywhere else. And so we miss the opportunity when we invest in development strategies that price out my family from living in that neighborhood, when we don't structure our investment strategies in a way that allow people who are, if I could use the word indigenous, to those neighborhoods and places, people who've invested their children and families in time for generations, they ought to be able to get a shot to stay in those spaces, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it is the best and strongest and most strategic way to preserve neighborhoods and to make the city stronger. Another example is crime. We have for generations in this country, and particularly in New Orleans, most recently, the most incarcerated city in the world, no longer, but invested in incarceration of people as a way to keep us safe. We now have both the evidence and the experience that it is not a strategy that works. We're very thankful to the mayor and the city council members, but mostly to community members who pushed for the kind of reform post-Katrina, to your point about silver linings, where we were able to cut the size of the jail in half, reduce incarceration and arrests by tens of thousands. That's real progress made. It's a really great example of how in the past we've invested in things that don't work. We're now turning the corner in New Orleans, I think, to invest in things that work for our people.
Equity is a conversation. It comes up in every conversation. And your personal story, Flozell, is interesting because it shows that equity is also about access to good things. And I want you to share the story about in your schooling when you were a kid, the year you spent on one floor, and then the year you spent on another floor of your school.
You really came prepared. So I'll try to make this short. So I grew up uptown New Orleans on Ferret Street. I went to a school called Henry W. Allen. named after a Confederate general, but we won't go there today. But it was a great, great place. I walked to school every day with my neighbors. We had teachers who were seasoned and experienced and who loved us. We were as likely to see those teachers, by the way, in the grocery store, in the church, and other places, because we actually lived in the same neighborhood and knew each other. And I got to the third grade, and I'd always been the kid who was a little smart, but also very chatty and a little disrespectful. So I stayed in trouble. I'm old enough to, back then you got U's on your report card, right? Old people in the room, I see. Yeah. And my mother gets asked to come to school, and she says to me as we're walking in, boy, she didn't actually say a whole statement, but it was just, And we get in there, and the teacher says, listen, I think we've got this wrong. I think he's actually really smart. I think he's capable. I think he's creative. I'd like to get him tested for gifted. We didn't know what that was, right? I'm first-generation college grad in my family. I take the test. I do well. And overnight, I go from one floor in the building where we had to sit in chairs and sit at desks and keep quiet and be very restricted, to the next floor where there were beanbags and plush carpets and books wall to wall and exploratory time and nap time and the ability to actually learn. It made me want to be a learner. And it changed my life. It created a space for me not to just want to learn, but it was one of those turning points where time and time again in this community, school teachers, members of my church, old men sitting on milk crates, women sitting on porches, no matter where you went, members of this community were looking out and creating space and opportunity. And in some ways, the post-Katrina discussion has been, we're going to do away with the old. And in some cases, those are the things that built some of us, right? That's the space that many of us had in schools and in community that actually gave us the opportunities that we have.
Mike, I want to bring you in here because we're talking about transformation and moving forward, and you transformed a space, a complete space, a little on the down low at first, right? If we're being honest. Abandoned apartment buildings I think that had never been actually occupied, one of them was. Tell us a little bit about what you learned from that experience of going in to a place and transforming it that you think maybe policymakers or officials could learn from, something that you learned in that process you think could be applied to anything within the city government and city halls.
I mean, I think it's echoing a lot of what Flozell just said about the idea that there's a lot of beauty in things that would traditionally be seen, or even from a perspective of progress, be seen as this needs to be just out with the old and with the new, you know what I mean? And I think what I learned from that process is that within the idea of articulating, using the art to articulate why that space is beautiful, and all we did was go in and collaborate with stories that existed. We didn't walk in with this blank canvas idea, like, oh, this is a blank canvas, we're going to completely create anew. It was this idea, no, these walls aren't blank, these canvases are filled with stories, how can we collaborate with those stories? And I think that's what made the project beautiful, that's what made the project authentic, because it was a process of exploring why this is beautiful and not covering up what it was. And I think that's something that I continue to learn and continue to apply to my process as an artist, is to think about myself as a collaborator. And I think if policy, if those who have the best interests in the places that they're trying to do work in consider themselves collaborators and not just the savior and not just the person that's going to come in and say, I have the answers, but how can I collaborate with what's there? And then as a collaborator, come up with answers together. I think that's what that process taught me.
Mm-hmm.
For you, Mike, there are some cities that have an artist in residence to try to reach out to people. Should New Orleans have one? And if so, what do you think that artist in residence could accomplish?
I think that's a large part of the question that culture bearers and culture creators are having in this city, especially at this moment, is how can we make sure there's more culture bearers in the room? How can we make sure that when decisions are made, because the problem I had with a lot of policy issues is that the artist is brought in as the last step. It's like after we figured it out, after we've planned it out, let's reach out to the artist, to the culture, to the music, to basically articulate what we just came up with. And I think what you'll find is that when you include the artist from the beginning, when the artist has a seat at the table, when the culture has a seat at the table, that there is so much more to be gained. And so I think I can only see great things that would come about if there was an artist in resident, if there was plural artists in resident. I think the beauty about New Orleans is that the culture table is so rich, it's so filled, that it wouldn't be seems like a complicated thing to just include in many rooms the culture and make sure those voices are represented and heard.
Okay. There's a new mayor coming in. Maybe it could happen. Terry, you are leading, let me make sure I get this right, community engagement efforts for NOLA?
Yes.
What does that mean? And what do you hope comes from this for the city?
It's a good question. Basically, what I do is reach out to the community and speak on behalf of our media organization. And I think the goal is to remind people that we are here and we have their best interests at heart, and we're part of this community as well. And the things like we learned in Katrina that we report on for our readers and our audience are the things that we live with every day. You know, like in Katrina, we were journalists who were living the same tragedy that the people we covered lived. You know, we lost houses, and our families were living in other states for a year while we tried to rebuild. We had to go through the road home process, and so I think we're just trying to re-engage with the community.
I did want to ask you about local news. I asked Walter before, and obviously your brother is at the New York Times, and that's a national news organization. You're a journalist on the local level, and we've seen recently local journalism have a huge impact. You know, the Larry Nassar story, the gymnast doctor who abused all those girls, that story was broken by the Indianapolis Star, right? The Flint, Michigan water story was broken by a local journalist on the ground at Detroit Free Press on the local public radio station there. Tell me about why local news will be important going forward, especially during this expansion and the next wave of new businesses and new folks coming to town.
Well, we're the only people who, we live here, and we know how to cover the city. And if local journalism isn't supported, then it'll only damage us all. You know, the New York Times can't go to a city council meeting and let folks know that that pothole in the middle of their street is going to be fixed. They can't do it. They can't look out for the best interests of our citizenry like we can. And I think local journalism is at a crossroads. I think readers have to support us. And if they don't, it's to their detriment.
T, I want to bring you in on the New Orleans Culinary and Hospital Institute. Is it Noki?
Hospitality.
Hospitality, excuse me. A $32 million training center for the culinary arts. In 20 years from now, what do you hope that center has accomplished?
First, I'm going to tell you something else. You may have noticed after Katrina, but we didn't actually have any political leadership. And that newspaper, for a time, was the greatest newspaper in America. And they helped lead this city, and that was a local newspaper, and it's true. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it really was amazing.
Hold on.
I mean, local, that's true. And it's really on a good path right now. In local, I mean, what the hell are you going to do without local journalism? It's ridiculous. But New Orleans Culinary and Hospitality Institute is really a $50 million project. It's one building off of formerly known as Lee Circle, and it's a 93,000 square foot facility where, can you believe we don't have a major culinary institute in New Orleans? And this one's going to be culinary and hospitality. I think hospitality is something that's in the DNA in New Orleans, and I think it's something that we can teach the world informally and formally, no matter what business you're in. But it will be a culinary institute. It will have workforce level training and then culinary and pastry training. Tulane is coming in and teaching hospitality entrepreneurship. And what's happening in entrepreneurship in New Orleans in the last 10 years has been extraordinary. And then we'll have my favorite part where we have the culinary enthusiasts and the beverage enthusiasts. We have Cocktail U. So you can come learn a little bit about cocktails and actually make cocktails. And so there's going to be some fun going on, but some serious activity there. And we broke ground about 6 weeks ago, and Tulane will move in November. And we'll open in January, and I think it's going to be a very important institution to New Orleans for a long time after we're all gone.
The hospitality industry is such a big driver in tourism and hotels and restaurants, but for a lot of folks who work at these places, they have a hard time making a living wage. What do we need to do to get it to the point when people can make a living wage and work in these fabulous places?
So I think you have to sort of bifurcate the industry, because most of the people that work for me, I mean, you can be there in 6 months, be making $70,000. And you don't even have to have a college education to do that. You just have to work hard. So, there's really no limits. But we were just talking before, we do struggle at times to attract enough, different folks. Some people seem to not want to be in the hospitality industry. I've thought about it for a long time. I think they think of it as demeaning, because nobody wants somebody to do that to them. Give me the, and we think of it as it's an honor to serve people. Tonight I serve you, tomorrow night you serve me. Anyway, but as far as the low paying jobs, you kind of have to bifurcate the industry and a little bit more some of the fast food institutions and certain aspects of some of the larger institutions. It's not as much of an issue. None of us even pay minimum wage, in the fine dining. But, we do need to push that. I've always been in favor of increasing the minimum wage. When the restaurant industry screams and yells, don't increase the minimum wage, don't listen to them. It's never been a problem. Every time they call me for a quote, I'm like, I'm not going to say what you want, because I think we should raise it, And so I believe in all that. It should go up from time to time, absolutely. And, some very basic things like that. But the more we can train people, the more there are no limits for them. And it's one of the greatest starter industries in America.
Let's talk about the city and crime. Any city that's trying to attract business and that has a high crime rate has to deal with it. Obviously no city wants crime. What's the issue? Why can't New Orleans get a handle on it? They had a really rough year last year in 2017. I can remember the first time I ever came to report on New Orleans was 1994.
Oh, yeah.
And that horrible year, that really tough year. What needs to be done? Is it gun control? Is it more police? What do we need to do?
I would venture that part of the story, the 300-year story of this city, includes not only the amazing kind of mixture, melange of cultures and people and all of the things that make people come to New Orleans, right? One of my colleagues in philanthropy calls it the cultural hub of America. We also have built an exceptional economy along the lines of race. And in particular, we don't talk about this because it's uncomfortable. The New Orleans economy historically, and I would say the country's economy, has been built on free labor. We were, according to the historic New Orleans collection and some historians, the place with the largest slave trade of people of African descent in the country during the domestic slave trade. Enormous wealth was built. We've never reconciled the equitable engagement of that wealth and what it means for every other part of the conversation that we're having: jobs, business ownership, housing, participation in democracy, the delivery of justice, the ability to be an American. And until we deal with those issues that are fundamental I think it's generational work of opening those spaces, being really truthful about not just what relationships we're in and how it is that we deal with issues that come up between people, but how do we fundamentally measure our ability for people to participate writ large in the ways that I'm talking about. We're going to have crime as a byproduct. The same with health outcomes and other things, and we have to think about it that way. Beefing up the police is not going to necessarily help. Doing all the things that we've done in the past or recreating them, we already know that mass incarceration doesn't help eliminate crime. What is going to help is edifying and lifting up and building families, giving children and their parents an opportunity to live well. Those are the kind of things that we know can really help us ameliorate some of the crime issues. And if you think about when you first came to the city in '94, I worked in the mayor's office from '96 to '99. We were dealing with those issues. And what helped us is not just beefing up the police. Those were the Clinton years. We were able to invest in families. We were able to invest in housing. We were able to invest in education and other things that really gave New Orleanians a chance to step away from the things that created crime to create some other opportunities for themselves.
You got to give people a chance.
You got to give people.
I'm going to ask one more question and then have the microphones out to the floor. Hopefully we'll get in one or two more questions. Mike, I wanted to ask you this. You know, there's been a lot of discussion nationally about young people and young people leading the way, obviously on this gun control debate. Of the young artists that you work with, and I'm guessing you're the youngest guy on the panel.
It's me.
What do they want to see for New Orleans going forward? I mean, they're going to be the adults in the next 50 years.
I mean, I'm a big fan of history, and when you look at history, you got to acknowledge that history is a continuum. It's not isolated moments, but it continues. And I always like to think about it like a relay race, and the baton is passed from generation to generation. And I think this younger generation acknowledges not only the responsibility of the past, but also how the new tools available are helping and amplifying the goal. And when I see the youth in New Orleans, I see a lot of courage and ingenuity in the context of seeing what's possible. I think New Orleans, good and bad, has always existed in a space where the present is the most important, where it's about being, which is why my projects has always been Project B, Exhibit B, Studio B, because it's about the beauty of now. It's not about saying, okay, 5 years from now, tomorrow. It's like, what am I going to eat today? Like, what can I do today? That's what's beautiful about New Orleans. But I think the youth and the generation are looking forward, and they're saying, okay, how am I going to grow and be able to exist beyond today? And I think that's something that is beautiful to see in terms of how those challenges are being met with the creativity. And there are challenges. I mean, one can argue, do the conditions exist for another Trombone Shorty to happen? And that's arguable. I mean, because when you think about the Treme neighborhood, when you think about the conditions that produce that genius, does it still exist? And I think in balance of that, the youth are finding ways to still produce the creativity, to still grow, to still be those seeds that continue to develop. And so I have great courage and confidence that the youth are going to lead the way to what the city should be.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's take a couple questions. We're out of time, but we're going to take a couple anyway. Go.
Good morning. My name is Bernadette Chaffin. I'm the owner of Senika. We're an artisanal body care brand. Ms. Stewart mentioned the Tricentennial Aromatherapy candle. That is actually made by my company. We're not sold out. Just go to 2018NOLA.com, and proceeds do benefit the 2018 NOLA Foundation. Now, I am a transplant from the Caribbean. So I'm from Dominique, and I grew up on the island of St. Croix, which is in the U.S. Virgin Islands. You may have heard about it during the hurricane season. So what happened in my community and is happening here in New Orleans, you see a lot of transplants and a lot of expats, and then you do have that commingling of cultures and so forth that then creates a new a new way of life, and sometimes that's separated. And you talked about really embracing the culture of New Orleans, and I've settled into New Orleans because it's very similar to Caribbean culture, but at the same time, I also learned to make gumbo from my New Orleans mom on Jenna Street that was born and raised in New Orleans. So my question to you guys is, how can we that are transplants and that we, those that are also born and raised, be better collaborators in terms of being able to maintain the culture that makes New Orleans rich, so that we're not having a gumbo with like asparagus and so forth, which could be good. It could be good, you know, and kale, you know, but how can we be better collaborators?
And this is going to have to be our final question. Whoever wants to take the answer.
I mean, to me, it just get in and engage. It almost doesn't matter what. You know, I mean, I just started doing things that very early on. A bunch of us, probably at your age, were upset at how negative New Orleanians were about New Orleans. And we got together and started this thing called Proud to Call It Home, which it still lives on, mostly in bumper stickers, but it's still out there. But it was making us realize that we were harming our city by being overly negative. So we gave out positive facts and we did all this stuff. But it doesn't matter how you engage. You sound like somebody who will. So pick a way and just engage. Like he said, collaborate.
And I would add, have some standards. You can't have asparagus in the gumbo.
That's right. There are some rules we're not going to change.
Some things will not change. Let's thank our panel.
Welcome back, the Atlantic's Bob Cohn.
All right. Thank you, Terry, T, Mike, Flozell, and Allison. Allison, I hope you're going to get a rev share of those aromatherapy candles when the sales start coming in. That was a great immersion into the challenges and opportunities and the vibrancy in New Orleans today. Now, coming now is a few words from our partners at Allstate. As I said earlier, we at the Atlantic could not do the Renewal Series without Allstate's support, collaboration, and vision. So it gives me a real pleasure to welcome to the stage Cynthia Whitfield-Story. Cynthia is the Field Senior Vice President of the Southern Region for Allstate, and she's at one side or the other.
Here I am.
Right in front of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, New Orleans. How you guys doing? Can we give another round of applause for that panel? They did fabulous. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my wonderful company called Allstate Insurance Company. And it's a pleasure for me to be here with you today because Allstate is sponsoring this event, and it's our third annual Renewal Awards and Celebrate Community-Based Innovation. Together with our partners, the Atlantic, thank you, Bob, and your group, we proudly shine a spotlight on the 5 Renewal Award winners for 2017. As Field Senior Vice President for Southern Region at Allstate, including this great city, I actually have the state of Louisiana in our 5 states and love to come to Louisiana. A lot of food. I always wear some stretchy clothes, so I know because I'm going to eat a lot, but I absolutely love it here. But I salute all of those who are making a meaningful difference at the local level, and I'm so honored to be here today. On a personal note, I share your drive to help people and make a difference. Giving back has been a big part of my adult life. I am currently on 2 boards in the state of Tennessee. I represent Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Middle Tennessee, and I'm also on the board of the YWCA of Nashville. Both support the same visions of the Renewal Awards program. And I just want to give you a little bit of information. When I got the opportunity to speak here, and I start combining and looking at things and saying, oh, this connects to Big Brothers, Big Sisters, this connects to the YWCA, and everything was just building together, and it was the right thing for me to do. So I thank you, Tara, and others that are really being a part of this. Throughout my career, I've experienced firsthand our company's commitment to communities everywhere. We value the people and small businesses that are the fabric of our everyday life. At our core, that's who we are at Allstate. At Allstate, we have our local community, a network of 10,000 small businesses across the country. I actually have a small group here. Can I get you just to stand real quick? I want you to see some of the agents that came to support this program today. Can you stand, please? Thank you. Thank you. They are our boots on the ground in cities, towns, and neighborhoods where innovation and change happen every day. Today, we celebrate individuals working tirelessly and often below the radar to find creative solutions to our nation's most pressing challenges. That's the spirit we celebrate with the Renewal Awards. Today, it is our privilege to honor these social innovators and change agents who are putting their values into action in their cities every single day. We at Allstate share the commitment. In every aspect of our business, we strive to do the right thing. Every day, we focus on 3 key areas. The first one is we need to make sure we're taking care of our customers throughout the country. Secondly, building strong small businesses. Our agencies actually own their own businesses here. And third, working to improve local communities. Now, what I want to do is to switch a little bit onto the company. You guys okay if I brag a little bit about Allstate Insurance Company a little bit? All right, thank you. So here we go. One way we sponsor local neighborhoods is by empowering young people to fulfill their potential and lead safe, productive lives. That's why it's a pleasure to sponsor the Allstate Youth Empowerment Award. We'll actually find out who the winner of that is shortly today. Each of the finalists showcased the tremendous work being undertaken at the grassroots level to support our youth in underserved communities. These initiatives are changing lives in 5 key areas. First one is programs focusing on mentoring and training. Just think when you get the opportunity to work with a young person and either be their sole person that helps guide them and coach them and direct them, that's a big key. The second one is really employment opportunities. How do you be successful? You got to have a job, right? I mean, we all need to have financial things to make us do what we have to do. Third is storytelling, and I want to spend a little bit of time on that. I spoke with a lot of the winners last night, and what we found out is they were telling their story. There is such a great wealth of knowledge and awareness that most of us don't even understand, and the opportunity to be able to tell your story in a way that you make people just stop in their steps and just say, okay, maybe I can do something different. Maybe I can make a difference. And then that was key last night, and all of the winners had that skill set. And the fourth is closing the opportunity gaps, and the fifth is support for at-risk families. Those are the 5 key areas that we'll talk about when you listen to the winners today. We can think of no better way to change communities than by empowering youth to improve their future and ours. Allstate's own commitment to helping young people takes many forms. We have our foundation. Through that foundation, we offer tools and resources for youth to build character, achieve academic success, gain leadership skills, find their voice, and share their stories. As engaged citizens, young people can mobilize others to volunteer and give back. And I think we all had a good opportunity to see that this weekend all over the country, the young people, what they were able to do, not only in our country, but also in the world. So many things can happen just by youth getting out there and getting involved. So if you're parents, teachers, make sure you encourage people to really be able to have a voice, because there's many things that they can do. Also, Allstate also leads the change on teen safe driving. How many of you guys have teenagers out here? Okay. They are usually bad drivers. I'm just telling you from experience. I've been doing this for over 30 years. So we have a program around teen safe driving, and it works to try to reduce fatalities. The number one reason why youth die in accidents is because they're usually driving too fast, they're not paying attention, texting, talking on the phone, and things like that. So to date, when we go in and do our calculations, we have actually helped more than 1.5 million young drivers throughout the United States. So I'm really proud of that. We have another partnership with Free the Children. We support and reward youth for volunteering all across America. So just think, you volunteer, Allstate is there, and we work in the communities, and we actually recognize those kids so that they start that skill early in their lives to give back. In 2017, the Allstate Foundation, Allstate Corporation, and our employee and agency force, now I want you to listen to these numbers. We raised more than $47 million in 2017. And that's just for local communities. And then if you take the whole last decade, it's totaled over $326 million that we've put back into communities. So I think that's a huge, huge effort on the company's behalf. I hope you can see why Allstate considers ourselves a force for good. We have 75,000 people, which includes agencies, employees, and agency staff. And here's two other numbers that I want to share with you. 60% of our employee base throughout the country do volunteer work in their community. 60%. It is part of our culture and what we do each and every day. Out of our agency force, which we have the 10,000 I talked about earlier, over 90% of them volunteer in their community. So if you have an Allstate agency in your community, I would advise you to stop in, have a conversation. They do a lot of local work, and maybe they can help your organization. So I really encourage you to do that. So when you're riding by, going to the grocery store, maybe one day you just pop in and say, hey, I was at this event. I understand that Allstate supports community. Can we talk about my goal and my initiatives? Okay, so I just encourage you to do that. Our chairman and CEO, Tom Wilson, has set forth a compelling vision for corporations to focus on the amount of good they can do for society. His message is this: by integrating the social impact into corporations' purpose, it's good for business. I'm going to say that again because I think people sometimes don't really understand that. His message is that integrating social impact into corporations' purpose is good for business. So what do I mean by that? What does that actually generate? So what it translates into is having greater customer loyalty, right? So if we're involved in something, a customer sees us out there volunteering on their initiative, they're going to be more loyal to the corporation. It also helps us retain, attract, and develop employees and agencies. So we are growing our business from the grassroots also, just like some of the award winners that we're going to talk about today. It's no coincidence that we're here in New Orleans for the 3rd annual Renewal Awards. These Renewal Award finalists and winners demonstrate that more progress can be made solving problems locally, and I think the panel shared that with you. Sometimes you just got to fix your own issues where they live, and we can't always expect the government and others to come in and solve that for us, so we just have to get busy doing it ourselves. Our 5 winners are perfect examples of power of local institutions. Just a little bit about them: from a community gathering place to education and mentoring support, entrepreneurial skills, and starting a small business. These grassroots innovators offer proof of what's possible as America renews itself from the ground up. The Renewal Project's mission is to find and tell the story of pragmatic problem solvers wherever they are. In addition to the Renewal Awards, the Renewal Project includes reporting on websites. The website is therenewalproject.com. Please take a look at that. It's phenomenal. It tells you stories about heroes. It includes community leaders. It talks about teachers. It talks about the nonprofit organizations and just regular folks that are trying to do some things differently in the world. The project also comes to life around social media platforms as well as through events and polling. So that's how they get their information, to make sure that we're communicating the right information. I hope you join the conversation by finding us on the website or social media and sharing the Renewal Project stories that most inspire you. And if you know someone in your local community who is making a difference, we want to hear about it. You can talk to Marge Meyer, the Renewal Project editorial director. Is Marge in the room? Can you stand up, Marge? Let's recognize her. She does phenomenal work, and I want you guys, if you can grab her, you're not going anywhere, right? You're going to be here, but I think there's a huge opportunity. She's got her cards, but talk to her. There's so many people out there, and a lot of communities, they don't know about this amazing award opportunity and this amazing project thing that you guys do with the community. So we just have to get the word out more, I believe. Today, we honor 5 incredible Renewal Award winners. By their example, they inspire others to drive change in their communities. I've had the opportunity to meet with all of them last night. We went to dinner, and I can tell you, I left there just fired up, totally committed to the cause, and they just shared each individual story to a point where you said they saw something and they did something, right? How many of us see something, we don't do anything about it, but they saw something, they did something, and now it's exploded, right? So we all have that opportunity to do that. So what I say to you is, Allstate is a proud sponsor of the Renewal Project, celebrating the winners and supporting the good being done every day to renew communities and bring hope to others. Now I'd like to introduce you to Levante Stewart, one of last year's Renewal Award winners. While you may not find him in magazines, newspapers, or online, I would say yet to that, because I think this guy's going to be a superstar. You are guaranteed to find him hard at work, planting the seeds of hope that bring about renewal and change in communities across the country. I'd invite you to join me in listening to Levante's story and celebrating the accomplishments of these innovators. I ask you also to pull out your tissues because you're probably going to have a few tears because I've seen it 3 times and I get choked up every time. So with that, I want to thank you all, congratulate the winners, the runner-ups, and the finalists. Thank you so much.
I'm Levante Stewart, Sr., founder and executive director of Lost Boys, Inc., one of the 5 winners of the 2017 Renewal Award. Lost Boys is a sports-based youth development organization focused on violence prevention using the platforms of organized baseball and girls fast-pitch softball. The Renewal Award from Allstate enabled us to improve our SYL, our teen worker program. We were able to double the number of kids served through that program.
I live in Chicago. I done seen everything. If I didn't see it, I heard about it. I could be sitting in my room or walking down the streets and I hear gunshots or something like that. I'm just thankful I'm still living.
Around here, for a kid just to get a first job or a summer job, it's almost near impossible. Usually if kids can't find a job, they turn to the street and they make a job. Children were beginning to age out of the league and they were running into problems, whether it was kids being shot, kids being incarcerated. So we had to figure out a way to keep them in.
I'm Tiara. I'm 16. I'm a junior coach. I get to coach and play.
About 4, almost 5 years ago, we launched our Successful Youth Leaders Program. For some of these kids, this is their very first job, and so it's huge. It's really exciting. The Allstate Renewal Award made it possible for us to double the number of kids served through that program.
You need this help, you need this support. So having this title is big to me.
It's a monumental step for them, a way to combat something darker that's typically waiting on them.
The people that's doing stuff for the youth, them the good people to me. Because y'all giving us an opportunity to not be in the streets. Y'all giving us an opportunity to follow the right path. I got goals in life.
For those who are lucky enough to win this award, I tell them to treasure it, to use it as a springboard because it's going to take you to a whole new level.
Please welcome Atlantic Senior Editor Ron Brownstein.
Good morning, everybody. And now for the moment that has brought us all together, the Renewal Awards and hearing from this year's winners, which is a great highlight. Brought to you by the Atlantic and Allstate, as you've heard. In its 3rd year, the Renewal Awards are a nationwide competition recognizing local organizations delivering positive change in their communities. This year we had nearly 3,000 nominations. And out of that, we have selected 5 winners and 5 runners-up. And as you'll see, I think it's pretty apparent why they have emerged at the top of a very arduous and strenuous competition. It is my honor to present the 2017 Renewal Award winners. The Hazelton Integration Project provides educational, community, and sports programming for this Pennsylvania city's disadvantaged families, including many new immigrants.
So by bringing the children together, by offering them quality activities, by keeping them off the street, we knew we could have a major impact.
Founded by Chicago Cubs manager and Hazelton native Joe Madden, the group runs the Hazelton One Community Center, which serves more than 1,000 kids a week.
I have this tendency to think big whenever I get involved in something. The thing that really stood out to me is we needed some place for the kids to go after school while the parents were still working. And it made all the sense in the world.
Austin's Call Me Madre empowers young Latinas and their mothers by providing education and support services to increase preparedness, participation, and success in post-secondary education.
We spend 5 years getting our mothers and daughters prepared academically, socially, emotionally, and financially for the college experience.
All of the participating high school seniors thus far have graduated, and more than 3/4 have enrolled directly into post-secondary education.
Our goal is to help every single Latina that comes through our program to successfully obtain her college education.
Light, Let's Innovate Through Education, works to close the wealth gap in Memphis by equipping young entrepreneurs of color with the skills they need to launch scalable businesses. An 8-year program, Light connects students ages 17 to 25 with mentors, coaches, and access to capital.
Once you find a passion in a student, they're willing to learn a lot more and go far beyond what the books teach them. So I've realized that once they start solving a problem that they're passionate about and we help them find a unique value, help them find a solution to that problem that they want to solve, you indirectly start seeing them advancing in all these core skills, but more importantly, in their confidence.
Based in Oakland, California, A New America expands economic opportunity for disadvantaged communities by helping residents create new businesses.
You will take a 15-week course, and during that course, you will develop a business plan.
Over the years, A New America has helped thousands of immigrants, women, and people of color launch businesses throughout the Bay Area.
This will be an opportunity to get you the little push and extra help that you need to start off your business.
New Orleans Youth Empowerment Project helps out-of-school and disconnected youth strengthen their ties to the community and develop the skills they need to succeed.
We have a responsibility to give all of our kids a fair shot in terms of ensuring that they have the love and the support and the skills and the opportunities they need to thrive and to survive.
Through education, mentoring, employment, and enrichment services, YEP has served over 1,200 children across the past 13 years.
That's what I like about YEP. That's what I love, not like, that's what I love about YEP.
Runners-up for this year's awards are Farms, a nonprofit in Rock Hill, South Carolina, expands economic opportunity for farmers and landowners. Charlotte, North Carolina's Profound Gentleman works to dismantle the cradle-to-prison pipeline by building a community of male mentors and educators of color. Fuji's Academy is an Atlanta private school that provides tuition-free education for refugee students from around the world. Soldiers Angels, a national nonprofit based in San Antonio, provides aid and comfort to the men and women of the United States military, veterans, and their families. San Francisco's Summer Search, the runner-up for the Youth Empowerment Award, works to close the achievement gap and increase the number of college graduates from low-income backgrounds. Congratulations to all of our winners. We're going to hear from the winners in a moment, but before we do, I'd like to ask a round of applause for our 5 runners-up. It was a very, as one of the judges I can attest, it was a very tight competition, and it was very difficult for the judges to differentiate between those they put in the very inner circle and those just beyond it. It was terrific organization. So, would they please stand? Farms, Profound Gentleman, Fuji Academy, Soldiers Angels, and Summer Search. Thank you. I'd also like to thank our judges who put in a lot of time. Brooks Rainwater, Cecilia Munoz, Eric Liu, Hector Barreto, Tara Liebert, and Levante Stewart, 2 of last year's winners, Pete Weiner, Amy Thompson, and Jennifer Roberts. Thank you for all of your work. And now, to help present the awards, it's my pleasure to invite Cynthia from Allstate, Cynthia Whitfield Story from Allstate, back to the stage. You got to wander over to the other side.
Yes, sir.
From the Hazleton Integration Project, please welcome founding president Robert Curry. From Con Mi Madre, please welcome Executive Director Teresa Granillo. From Let's Innovate Through Education, please welcome Executive Director Pamela Yurketa. From A New America, please welcome CEO Steve Dial. Accepting the Allstate Youth Empowerment Award, please welcome Melissa Sawyer, the co-founder and executive director of New Orleans' own Youth Empowerment Project. Congratulations to the 2017 Renewal Award winners. Back to you, Ron.
Thank you. Oh,
Here,
I get your award.
we forgot that instruction.
Don't want to lose those. You know, as I mentioned, this was a pretty rigorous competition. And I think in talking to the judges, one thing that made all of your organizations rise to the top out of the 3,000 or so was how comprehensive a set of services you offer. In many cases, dealing with families and young people over a long period of time, from elementary or middle school all the way through college. In other cases, offering a very broad range of services. I'd like to ask, maybe as a way of starting, each of you to talk a little bit about the range of services you offered when you started, what you're doing now, and why and how it changed in between. Bob, maybe you can start us off.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Atlantic and certainly Allstate for your support. This is an extraordinary moment for all of us up here, and I just wanted to say thank you so much. But yeah, I think all of us here sitting on this panel would say one thing that we have in common, and that is we listen carefully. When the people that we're serving, they have needs that go so far beyond what we initially thought. One example of that would be very clear. My wife, who is here with me today, talks about how poverty, if you don't understand the face of poverty, you're never going to be able to affect change. And one of the ways that we see this is with technology. So when we opened our doors, we never envisioned a place that would have 26 computers that we now have. We have a computer lab because 40%, fully 40% of the people or the children that come through our doors don't have access to computers, don't have smartphones. And of course, as the school district moves ahead with technology, they say, oh, everything is online. So we've got an enormously active computer lab that exists every day from the time school gets out until we close our doors. So that's one extension. But we also start looking at not just treating children. If we're trying to really affect change and level that playing field, we're also looking at entire families, and that's what we've seen, the growth. So all of a sudden, instead of just having programs for kids, we have over 125 adults in ESL classes because we have a lot of English language learners in our community. We've got GED classes, we have citizenship classes. None of these were envisioned when we started our project, but we just have to expand to meet the need that actually exists.
Teresa?
Yeah, similar to Bob's experience. And we started in 1992 based on the statistic that a Latina baby girl in the Austin area had a less than 1% of chance of going to college. So okay, let's tackle that. Started in 6th grade and thought it was just going to be a 6th grade program. At the end of that 1 year of working with the girls and their mothers, the moms and the daughters said, well, what about next year? And what do we do from here? And so the program extended on. This, again, started to snowball in 2012. Same issue was happening where the students came back to us and said, hey, we're struggling through college. You got us to this point, and you congratulated us as we walked the stage to go to the next chapter, but now we need more support. And so we've had to answer the need. And it's now extended our programming from 6th grade all the way through till college graduation. And similar to Bob's experience, we've always done a mother-daughter program. It's a 2-gen program where we engage moms in every step of the educational process with their daughters. What we were seeing was an unintended positive consequence that moms were becoming empowered to go back to school themselves. And we went, oh my goodness, there's something powerful here. Let's support them. Let's provide them with the pathway for that. We just launched a new program that actually does more focused parent training in terms of education, but also workforce development. And it's a partnership with the schools that we work with. So it's actually being delivered in the schools. So the school gets the benefit of having parent engagement and parents on campus. And the parents get the benefit of the programming, but also being able to be engaged with their child's education on that campus. So lots of different services that have come about over the last 26 years because there's a need.
Yeah, so just like what they were saying, is we all envisioned one first tiny step that grew into hopefully one day a really big on fire as we continue to grow. But ours actually just started in a classroom with 3 students where we saw that these students were just given like a problem to solve and they loved it, but we challenged them to actually go out there and solve that problem. So the original founder had, ventured out to seek capital to give them money to solve that problem. And when we realized that these students were not just seeing an opportunity to solve this problem, they were also wanting to expand their business, we saw that there was like a need for this. And once we looked at the numbers, less than 1% of the money that's generated by African-American owned businesses in Memphis, yet Memphis is 67% African-American, and we saw that there was a need for this even more. So
the city is 67% African-American, but less than 1% of the business revenue in the city is generated by businesses owned by African-Americans.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely. So, as we all know, the numbers show that we need to continue growing, but we created an 8-year timeline, and now several volunteer systems for the first 6-month accelerator program for the high school students and now for the college students. And it's not just giving them businesses to start or giving them capital and networks, but it's also paid internships because we understand that they're in a financial predicament. So we literally partner them up with other mentors and other businesses that could potentially help them out in their business career over this 8-year pipeline.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done, but we're excited.
Steve.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Allstate and also the Atlantic. We are very humbled by this recognition. For us, change has been a couple of different ways. First, when we first started 19 years ago, our mission was to help new Americans. So that was immigrants, refugees, in terms of leveraging entrepreneurship to get their piece of the American dream. But what happened was the 2008 financial crisis and the impact that had across communities made us realize that we need to service the other members of our community that are severely impacted. So the board made a decision to expand our formal mission to include people of color, minorities, low to moderate income individuals. Now, along the way, we had served different groups, but the formalization of it, I think, really helped in terms of showing that, if we have something that we can help in our community and use it as a means to bring people together and try to break down some of the barriers that are created, that this was our opportunity to do it. So I think that's one of the ways we've evolved.
And it's wonderful to be in front of so many friends and to have the Atlantic and Allstate here in New Orleans. And again, we're grateful to be able to showcase, all of the wonderful things going on in the city, but still how much yet we still have to do. Yep's story, and some of you all may know this, we started as the first juvenile reentry program in the state of Louisiana. Yep was founded in the wake of the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2003, working with young people coming back to the New Orleans region who'd been incarcerated and removed from their homes. Part of the impetus as well was losing young people to street violence. Within the 6-month period before we started YEP, 6 young men I worked with were murdered coming home. And it really got to this tipping point for us where if our children are safer in what are really archaic, terrible penitentiaries, but they're safer there than they are at home. We are failing our children, and it's not enough to get kids out of jail. We need to ensure that they have the supports and their family have the supports that they need to truly thrive and actualize their potential. So YEP was really small when we started. We've always had our home base on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard in Central City. We were fortunate not to flood during the storm, so we really felt, again, a sense of responsibility to come back and to continue to help after we helped the state of Louisiana do some statewide work, but also working in Texas, reconnecting kids and families to services. And when we came back, there weren't enough schools open, and there was a lot of especially high school age kids who were just kind of hanging out by our office. And then we thought, well, we need to do something about this. Adult illiteracy is a huge issue in our community, one we don't talk about enough. At that point, we started what is now No Play, which has been championed by the City Council and the City of New Orleans, as well as through a partnership with the Louisiana Community Technical College System and local partners. And today, we're the largest organization working with opportunity out of school and court-involved young people, running 11 different programs.
11 different programs. And dealing with kids from as young as 7
Correct.
to as old as 24, and even as you were explaining beyond that with your adult literacy. What is the key to maintaining a relationship with some? I mean, how do you keep people engaged for that many years in the program?
I think part of the challenge that we find, and we talked about this a lot last night, was when you're looking at oftentimes federal public streams, they fund folks, but it stops when someone's 18, or it stops when someone's 21, or they don't need crisis intervention. But we know that that's not how life is. People don't live in silos. Life is fluid. We're always dealing with challenges, and so we always need to ensure that we have a caring, compassionate, secure safety net for all of us. We all need that. And I think young people know who's authentic and who truly cares. Young people recognize people from their communities who are working in organizations like YEP, who are there for the long haul, who aren't there for the paycheck, but because they actually truly care about what they're doing. And I think, again, last night as we were talking, this is a mission. It's really a labor of love. It's not a job. And I think anyone who commits themselves to trying to address a social challenge, and for us in the wake of Katrina, we had so many other problems to want to solve, but I see some amazing community partners in the audience. You need to stay in your lane, and we tried to be really clear on what is our core purpose, what are our core values, what do we need to build upon, what are the community and our young people asking for, but not doing something outside of our purview that we can't really excel at.
Let me ask, one thing that has changed is in the late 20th century, most major cities were losing population, they were struggling economically. That's not really the case anymore. It's not true for everybody on this stage, but many of you are operating in places that are booming. I mean, that are, almost all of them are gaining population, and many of them are seeing a big economic upturn, a lot of young professionals coming in. I'm interested, Austin certainly would qualify as that. Is that relevant to the lives of the families you work with? Does it create more opportunity for them? Or in some ways, does it create more strains on them? Are they benefiting at all from the growth that we are now seeing in so many cities?
The answer is yes and no.
Yes and no.
So on one hand, the growth, particularly in Austin, the gentrification that's happening in our city is pushing the families that we serve out of the city, and actually has resulted in us having to then also expand our services outside of the city. And so there's that issue of affordability and transportation issues that comes with a booming city that wasn't prepared for the boom. And then there's the opportunity, and I think what we've seen is that our millennials, our younger population that is either grown into the city or moving in, they are charged up. They are ready. They're activated. They're ready to do community work. They're ready to get involved. And so we've really seen a lot more community involvement in that way, and in mentoring our girls and being a participant, whether that even fundraising. I mean, this younger group is really charged up. So that's been pretty, it gives us hope.
Steve, no place is booming more than the Bay Area. What is that? But has that
if you can live there.
Has that radiated out to provide opportunity for the families and the entrepreneurs that you work with?
I think for the majority of population, it has presented a strain. Bay Area and roughly, I think latest statistics, you need about a household income of $170,000 in order to buy a home. You have rents of one-bedroom rents, $3,000 in San Francisco, probably $2,000 in Oakland. So it doubly impacts the communities that we serve. And it's a huge issue. And government, nonprofit, other individuals are trying to figure out how do you solve it. And I think in the current environment, our work almost becomes doubly important, because not only do you have the affordability issue, you have the issue of the change in jobs. It's no longer, I'll go and work at this place for 10 years. Maybe they'll hire me as a consultant for 12 months, and then 12 months later, I need to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So we're in a gig economy. So how do you really provide stability for individuals under that? So that's where having a quote-unquote side hustle or entrepreneurship is going to become increasingly important for people to have some means of affordability so they can stay.
How about in New Orleans, which has regained population, has seen more business activity? What's it meant for the young people that you work with?
I think it's complicated. I think for us, when young people come through our doors who are of working age, about 78% of them are unemployed. If we're looking at the number of folks who are really struggling to survive, to thrive, to take care of their families, two of the issues I'm becoming increasingly fascinated with, because they're not in my wheelhouse, are housing and transportation, and just how everything is so inexorably linked, and that all of these come together. If you don't have transportation to get to your job that you need to make a family-sustaining wage to take care of your family, then everything is interrelated. And so I think that we need to stop siloing issues and really take a holistic sort of approach to how are we going to address these issues that are very complicated to ensure, as Walter said earlier, there's a level of equity, and we're looking at this work through an equity lens about who are the folks who are actually benefiting from this change, and how do we ensure that those who currently aren't are actually engaged with and connected to the opportunity.
All of you are working with groups that, to a large extent, are excluded from some of the positive things that have been happening in the economy in the last few years, that are facing gaps in wealth and educational attainment and income. On the other hand, the future of the country is in the groups that you are working with. I mean, we are at a point now where a majority of the public school students in the country nationwide, not just a few big cities, are kids of color. And the Census Bureau projected that by 2020, which is functionally the day after tomorrow, a majority of everyone under 18 in the country will be kids of color. And by 2027, a majority of everybody under 30 in the country. So that's kind of like next week, if 2020 is the day after tomorrow. I'm interested, but you are in a place, Bob, that has been on the front line of kind of dealing with what this Hazleton is a city that was predominantly white, older, was declining in many ways, has now received this big infusion of a younger Latino population, but there's been a lot of strain in dealing with that. Talk about what has been the point of collision, and whether you see kind of a way of coming out of that into something different.
I think it's unusual. It's really pleasing for me to be able to say these words, but I think Hazleton is reaching that tipping point, and that we are looking at some of the positive developments that this new immigration has brought. But it has not been without growing pains, and I'd be the first one to say it. We've had a lot of older residents in particular. You mentioned an aging population. There was a brain drain. Unemployment was sky high. In 2000, unemployment was over 11%. That number is somewhere around 4.75% now. However, the strain of having newcomers who speak with accents or perhaps don't speak the language at all, who have been painted with the broad swath of a brush, increased crime, difficulties in schools, all of the things that you think about that we hear daily in the national news came to a focal point in Luzerne County in Pennsylvania, which was one of the counties that shifted dramatically in this last election. So for us, we're seeing something entirely new, and it has made it a bit of a focal point for the country. We're seeing the people of Hazleton gradually becoming more and more accustomed to the newcomers and seeing the benefits both economically and culturally that the newcomers provide to us. Suddenly we don't have such an aging population. Suddenly our school system is booming. Unemployment, once again, has gone way down. We have new businesses moving in all over the place. And Hazleton is becoming the kind of place that is the new kind of American small town.
Yeah.
And that's what we believe.
So, Pam, let me ask you this. In Memphis, in your community, are the kids you work with seen as a problem or as an asset?
Oh.
I mean, is there a sense in the community?
To me, as an asset.
Is there a sense in the community that these kids are our future, or are they seen that way? Is there a kind of an investment in them in that way?
There's definitely an investment with the nonprofits and the demographic that we serve. We've been able to form great partnerships with all the other with the Memphis community, and there's a really strong entrepreneurial ecosystem there. So we've had a lot of support, so we see them as an asset for sure. However, the demographic that we serve right now, poverty rates when we first started, actually 3 years ago, have been increasing, and they've been at a standstill since 45%. We have a 45% child poverty rate in Memphis. So there's a need for more nonprofits to obviously work collaboratively together to help our students. But we definitely see them as an asset. We see them changing the world. It's just going to take 8 years. We can't bridge the poverty, the racial wealth gap within 6 months.
I think it's clear that you see them as an asset.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about your community. Teresa, what about you? I mean, Texas is a place where, 2/3 of the public school students now, I think, are Hispanic. Is there sufficient awareness of what that means and what it takes to bring those kids into the middle class?
I think there's a good movement. I wouldn't say that we're in a state of complete awareness yet. We still are in Texas. So, but there's definitely a larger awareness. And what we've received is that when we go out and talk to the corporations to say, hey, look, this is your future, not just my future.
That's the point, right?
Right, and it's not just their future. This is your future. So you have the opportunity to invest now for what we're going to have. The train is coming, whether you like it or not. So let's make sure they're educated, they're prepared, they're supported, their families are on board. Let's do that now. And we are seeing a definite change in that whole perspective. That they are our future and we're going to invest.
Can I ask you, talk about working with partners, whether it's government, businesses, other nonprofits. What's the level of awareness on that same question?
I think it really depends on who you're talking about. I think one of the things that I push hard on the media for doing is constantly we have negative depictions of young people in our community who are on the television set. And when you ask folks to come cover a celebration and graduation, that's not newsworthy. And so I think we have to change, what are we tuning into? What do we want to see? There's so much more good happening in our community and in our neighborhoods than there is negative. But that's not what's being put out there. And I think that fosters a level of fear and distrust and otherness. And so then we overly rely on incarceration to solve our problems. And I think that, we need to get our priorities right. I like to say that budgets are moral documents. So I'm going to keep pushing the local administration to invest in our children and to invest in programs that are really, truly going to be the root cause of the challenges that we're facing. And we need to humanize all people with one another. And we talked about that a lot last night, is just finding the common humanity among all of us, and that we're really all in this together, whether or not we want to admit that. And so how do we say that we're all going to take responsibility for our community and our kids? I'm
struck that, again, out of this very large competition, that programs focused on building wealth and ownership, two emerged, two directly focused on that. Talk about, Steve, why do you view that as a critical lever, building ownership?
Well, that's critical, because to really impact someone's life financially and economically, not just for their current household, but for future generations, the knowledge of financial literacy and the ability to start to accumulate wealth and to understand how you can translate that into greater wealth and opportunities, that's critical. That's what really changes lives. For example, I'll give you an example. Have a young man who's a current employee whose parents went through our program years ago. And because he saw the impact that program had, he wanted to work with the organization. So again, I think the critical piece of it is giving people the knowledge and the skills that are really going to help them move economically and help them build their family and their communities.
Let's bring in the audience if we have a question. Do we have any questions?
My name is Claire with the Convention Center. Melissa, I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit more about in this city, this sort of siloed nature of the organizations, as you mentioned, and how we can better approach things more holistically and connect those, because I think one thing that's striking is sort of the number of organizations locally that do good work, but I think we all, as you mentioned, can see the connectivity between their various sectors. And so how do we better connect the dots?
So I think one of the things we need to do at the sort of local political level is ensure that we're not politicizing issues that shouldn't be politicized, that we need to really build a sustainable infrastructure in this community that will withstand not just a 4-year and 8-year term, but that we're truly investing in the future of our city for the long haul. And so I think really looking holistically at how are we shaping departments, how are we deciding on funding priorities, and that's where the public can come in and advocate and go to city council meetings and ensure that the things we care about, if we're trying to get more resources to kids or more prevention dollars or more mental health dollars or more substance abuse dollars, that we are out there and we are saying this is what we care about as a community. I think in terms of partnership, one of the things I've personally been doing is trying to educate myself about issues that don't directly fall under YEP's umbrella, but that impact the lives of all of our young people. So educating myself on housing issues and public transportation and early childhood education. That's not really what we do, yet it is what we do because it impacts our kids and our families. And so a lot of that is how can I educate myself to be a better advocate, to be a better leader, to be a better partner, to be a better citizen, quite frankly. And I think that that's important. We all do that. And when we know that we're not best suited to do something, we find a partner who is, and we build trusting relationships and caring relationships and ensure that we share core values to make sure that we also feel comfortable making those referrals. Because a lot of times, you should partner with this organization, but if you don't have that level of trust or confidence that another organization is going to treat your young people or their families the same way you would, then there's a level of hesitancy. So a lot of this is, I think, about relationship and trust building.
We've got to turn over the stage in a moment to our next guest, but let me ask real quick, because I think we have a lot of people in this audience who are working in their communities or want to work in their communities. So maybe a quick thought from each of you, on what it takes to build an organization that has a sustainable impact. What is required to have a civic organization that can make a difference and make a difference over time?
From our standpoint, we took a look at this. That was one of the first central questions that we looked at. And we sort of analyzed all the different ways that we could do it. Look at fundraising very seriously, look at possibilities from grants, foundations, and the partnerships that we all find necessary from businesses. All of those things have to be in place. You've got to have the right geography, the space in order to accomplish your mission. And then when you do line it up, most importantly of all, you just got to jump. You just got to do it. Most of us know what the right thing to do is, and it's just that little push. You get a group of people together who have the right ideas, who have the right hearts, and just make it happen. And I'd encourage every one of you to do so as well.
I'll say partnership and collaboration, and Melissa, the point of like a trusting collaborations, finding those people in your community and outside of your community that that you guys collectively can make a greater impact, I think is huge. And then one thing that I do every morning is that I ask myself, why did I get started in this in the first place? What was the passion that moved me to take that leap? And that helps me every day to stay committed and motivated. And I think in this work, it can be draining, and you have to find something that's going to keep pushing you every single day to fight harder and to work harder for the families that you serve.
I'd have to say, like everyone else, partnerships is realizing that we can't do this alone. We need all the help we can get, and we either all come out together or we all sink together.
I would say drive, teamwork, partnership, and really planning a model of sustainability. And seeing how can, if certain funders decide not to fund you, can you close that gap, and how can you move your organization to where it can be self-sustaining or as best as possible?
And I think I would say it's about humility and not having an ego about the work. And I think that too often we have issues where you have someone who's a charismatic leader, they go away, we haven't built the infrastructure or the groundwork to sustain the work. And if you're doing this, it shouldn't be about you, it shouldn't even be about your organization, it should be about trying to make greater change. And I think that we all need to continue to challenge ourselves to be the best that we can be as we're helping to be leaders in this space.
Well, with leadership like this, I think you can understand why these were the organizations that rose to the top of the list. So would you join me in honoring again the 2018 Renewal Award leaders? Thank you. Thank you all. You can go up that way. That way. You go that way. All right. I'm staying for the mayor. All right, there you go. Thank you, Steve.
Joining Ron on stage, please welcome Mayor Mitch Landrieu.
Hey, Mr. Mayor.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Hey, everybody.
Wow, thank you for joining us.
Great to
and
be here. How y'all doing?
The newly minted Profile and Courage Award, the John F. Kennedy School of Government. Your mayor.
Thank you. Hey, Jason.
Congratulations on
Thank
that.
you. Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you so much for being here with us. Let's start with the more than half full side of the glass, which is that since Katrina, New Orleans has experienced significant economic growth and population growth. I saw that the population growth for the entire metro area as of this January is back up to 95% of what it was in 2000, which is a remarkable amount of recovery. What has been the key? What has allowed that to happen?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's nice to see you. Thank all of you. Welcome to the Ace Hotel. My council member at large is with us today, Jason. Thank you. It's nice to see you. And so many of the people that helped, bring New Orleans back from the brink. Let me begin on the other side just for a minute to acknowledge that New Orleans still has a long way to go. We have still a lot of problems to solve. And so nothing I say should be seen as a contradiction to that, but it is important to start.
Don't worry, we'll get to all of that.
Yeah, I know. To start where your panelists left off about the way is more important than the people, and how we actually got from being a descending city to being an ascending city. So what do I mean when I say that? The night before Katrina hit, the city of New Orleans was losing population. Every indicator, every one, was going in a negative direction. Everyone that you wanted to go up was going down, and everyone you wanted to go down was going up. And after Katrina hit, I think something miraculous happened. It took a while for the miracle to take shape, because like any community, we were traumatized. We were stuck. You'll see this in Puerto Rico right now. We didn't really know which way to go. We didn't know how to get our leadership straight. We didn't know how to talk to each other. We were worried that some people were going to take our stuff and other people were going to take credit for what we did. And we went through 3 or 4 years of really being stuck. And then we began to figure out that we were kind of all in this together, and that if we didn't band together, we were going to have a problem. And so the city, and I think this is the miracle of the whole story, we all did together stop the city of New Orleans from falling off of a cliff. People forget this because all of us are oriented into today. But 12 years ago, and actually a couple of weeks before I took office, during that period of time, we had gone through Katrina, Rita, Ike, Gustav. We got our butts kicked by the national recession, and then we had the BP oil spill, which not only killed 11 citizens, but basically upended our economy again. So we had 3 economic tsunamis, one after 9/11, and we had just gotten back right before Katrina. Then we had Katrina. Then we had the BP oil spill. Now, I'm not aware of any other group of folks anywhere in the country that have had to resurrect themselves from that. And so now, when you look at the city, we have brand new schools, brand new learning centers that before Katrina, you would not have wanted your kids to go to. Now we have really some of the finest physical buildings. We're in the midst of reforming our education system, and the indicators there broadly, although there's controversy around this, is that graduation rates are up, dropout rates are down, and the achievement gap is closing. So the kids, my kids, that they said couldn't learn, actually, when they're given the right tools and the right teachers and the right incentive, are actually doing much, much better than people thought. We've built 3 new hospitals. We have an entire new medical economy that we didn't have before. We have a bunch of primary health care clinics that have helped kind of create getting to the front side of healthcare rather than the back. We're building a new airport. We're building a new riverfront. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on fixing these really broken, terrible streets that we have that have been with us for a long time and continue to deteriorate because the pipes underneath the city are bleeding about 40% of our water. And we are the poster child for when infrastructure is not invested in it when it breaks and what it looks like when you do invest in it and how you create jobs. And the way we did that, and the way is much more important than the thing, and I completely agree with that young lady that was up here before. It shouldn't be about any one person. When you wrap an organization around one person as opposed to the way of getting things done, as soon as that person leaves, everybody's like, well, what do we do now? And you've got to build strength into your DNA. And so what happened here that's very different than what I've seen in other cities up to this point is because none of us had enough, we all found ourselves at the table together. And I use these words because I can't think of more simple ones to use, but we really focused on horizontal and vertical integration, this way and that way, across a number of different sectors, the government sector. So that what that meant was, when we were dealing with the federal government, we weren't just dealing with the Secretary of Department. We wanted the Deputy Secretary, we wanted the regional director, and we wanted the local director, so there was no lack of communication, for example, in HUD. But the problem was, in Washington, they have a lot of stovepipes. And those organizations don't talk to each other. So we asked President Obama to push them together. And Secretary Donovan, before he became the director of OMB, became like the director of making sure the federal government, when they spoke to us, spoke with us with one voice so that we didn't have to run up there and talk to 50 of them. They were all in the room. Then we made sure that the state government was in the room and the local government. And on top of that, did not try to do anything without the faith-based community, without the not-for-profit. So Jim Page, you standing in the back of the room, Habitat for Humanity. You know, and thousands of organizations that do the same kinds of things, but maybe in different iterations. We were all at the same table trying to work on system design, and I like to think that we had equal opportunity and equal responsibility, and as a consequence, we began then, once we got the way right, to be able to see things coming out of the ground, gave us a little bit more confidence in ourselves, told us where to direct money and where not to direct money, and we got to be a pretty well-oiled group of individuals, all coming from different places that began to achieve what I call the one team, one city fight because we were focused. Now, I have to say that today, we're kind of starting to go back to fighting over the itty-bitty things that created, you know, alienation between us. And I think you got to fight really hard to not dismiss those concerns as being important, but to stay focused on a common agenda.
You've restored a baseline of economic growth, of population growth, but like many cities, you are dealing with sustained inequities, right? Big gaps along racial lines in income, in educational attainment, in wealth. What does it take to go to the next stage and to have a growing economy in which a broader circle of the community
It's a great question. Some things are micro and some things are macro. The macro things are school system, most important thing. At the end of the day, if you can't teach and you can't learn, there's almost no way to get to a place of creating a job or getting hired someplace. Entrepreneurship is important. The notion, and I don't want to shy away from this because we just announced that DXC technology is coming in. It's one of the biggest job gets that we've gotten, 2,000 high-tech jobs, and it's great. It's going to be really, really great because they're going to hire a lot of people from here, but they're going to bring people from here. And that's one way of economic growth and development. But the other way is to be creative yourself. And so the idea, Philip, and this whole notion of entrepreneurship and being a creator of small businesses is critically important too. But all of that rests on having a good education is what I would say. Secondly, how the criminal justice system treats its citizens. Now, ours has been particularly bad over the years. In Louisiana, we incarcerate more people than any place else in the world. And so Jason and I and a whole bunch of other people have spent a lot of time really thinking about how to be tough on crime, because there are people out there that are going to commit crimes. You have to protect, I have to help protect you from them and them from each other, and make sure that those people that are going to continue to do that, but we ought to know that not everybody and not every crime is the same. And there are a lot of people that are doing things that do not warrant life sentences or 14-year sentences and a prison to pipeline that we have. And we ought to be smart enough to figure out how to be tough and smart. And then finally, in order to deal with the issue of equity, which we have confronted directly in the city, number one, you have to acknowledge that it exists. Not have a debate about whether it exists. It exists. The system is inequitable, and equity is different from equality. Dr. Norman Francis, who's all of our godfather, you know, here always tells us, and everybody's heard his speech before, but if he was here, he'd put 2 glasses here that contain water. And one would have a lot of water in it and one would have a little. And he'd pour the same amount of water in each glass, and the inequity would still be the same. And so what you want to do is level that off, and you do that by creating opportunity. Now, the first thing we had to do was to confront the fact that it existed. So in our city, with our city council's blessing, we spent a pretty good amount of money on a disparity study so that we can empirically demonstrate to people. Because I believe if you can't count it, you can't manage it. And if you can't see it, you can always deny it. So empirical data is important. And so we did this on housing. Our housing folks are here. We did this on disparity studies so that people who are in business can see, here, Mr. CEO, let me show you where the inequity is, and let me show you why you're losing. So we developed something. So we tried to see what we could see and know what we can know. And then once we did that, we said, well, what is the specific strategy, not the theoretical strategy for changing it? So now that we know that 38,600 African-American men are not working in the city, what is the specific plan for those specific individuals? And so we had to create what we called an anchor strategy. So I called in all the CEOs of all the major companies and said, look, here's the deal. You are an anchor institution. In other words, you're supposed to be anchoring a neighborhood. You have all these people coming from outside of the city working in the neighborhood, and all the people living in the shadow of your building are not. So here's my theory. When the sun's at 12 o'clock and it casts a shadow on your building, wherever that shadow casts, everybody that lives in that shadow should be working in your building. So why don't we think about figuring out who those individuals are, creating worker training programs, and then making sure that the people of New Orleans rebuild New Orleans. And we've been working on that now for a good 5 or 6 years with some good, promising progress there.
And as you know from your work with the Conference of Mayors, this is not a unique problem to New Orleans. When John Hickenlooper was the mayor of Denver, he called this the Denver paradox. He said, on the one hand, the economy and the quality of life is such that we're attracting educated, talented young people from all over the country and all over the world to come live here. And yet we can't put our own kids from low-income neighborhoods on a track to compete for the jobs that we are creating. And we hear that in Austin, in Seattle. We've been all over with this project. And we hear from mayors over and over again. One answer that people have looked at is expanding basically the educational ladder. You have more cities trying to invest in pre-K and even in some cases post-high school, funding 2 years of post-secondary. Is that realistic for cities to take on that burden to create a longer educational track for people?
Well, you asked the question about the what, and then you asked the question about the how.
Right.
And those are two different things, and you have to be clear about them. Nobody in here should be confused about what's happening, which is that Washington is stuck. All right? It's getting more stuck, not less stuck. It's providing less leadership and less resources. And the consequence of that, and this has been happening for the past 30 years across Democratic and Republican administrations, although the Republicans are much more hostile and intentional about it, is they are pushing responsibility to do things and to pay for things down to the ground. Let me just give you one example. Mental health, which of course we all are dealing with as it relates to public safety and guns and all kinds of stuff. Mental health has always been in the purview of the federal government, but they quit funding mental health a long time ago. The consequence, City of New Orleans right now is under federal consent decree from the same Justice Department of the same executive branch that won't fund mental health because we don't provide mental health in our prisons, which is not where mental health is supposed to be provided. They're supposed to be on the other side of the prison gate. But they're holding us accountable, and they're punishing us because they can do it through a federal court and take our money. Federal judge can tell Jason, who's the head of the city council right now, that I want you to take money from NORD and I want you to give it to mental health behind the jail door because we can. Now, a federal judge is not really a council member. They don't go to hearings, but they can do that. And so one of the things that cities have been saying back to Washington is, look, we're not asking you to do our work for us. We're asking you to do your work so that we don't have to do your work for you. You guys are like deadbeat dads now. Right? Y'all have all kinds of obligations. And so what is happening? And this is happening across education, healthcare, whatever it is. The federal government is pushing all of those responsibilities down to the ground. The states, which are not managing their budgets as well as ours. Jason and I managed our budget 8 years in a row, balanced budget. We got money in the bank, highest credit rating that the city has ever had. Okay, that's how we manage our budget. State of Louisiana is suffering a $2 billion deficit. They can't make ends meet. They just had a special session that failed. Congress has the largest debt and the largest deficit that it ever had. So you can imagine how mayors and council members feel when Washington doesn't show up and they say, oh, you fixed the problem. So now let me get to your specific answer to your question. We know the answer. Brain development, 0 to 3, critically important for every child in America. That's where the game is, 0 to 3. But the question is, where is the money to do that? Who's supposed to pay for it? What happens on 0 to 3 and then early childhood education? We took the first step, really against my better judgment. Jason and them wanted to fund early childhood. I said, don't do that. And they said, why? It's important. I said, it's critically important. It's a major priority. But you see, that's not our budget item. That's supposed to be the state, and that's supposed to be Congress. And Jason and them said, well, thanks, Mr. Mayor, for your advice, but we're going to ignore it because we can't wait. And you know what? They were probably right about that. But now what's going to happen is, this is going to happen. You can see this coming from a mile away. You don't have to guess about this. Cities that have money and that have tax bases are going to outpace cities that don't.
Right,
so cities that are poorer right now are going to be stressed, and then the income divide is going to get exacerbated just like the rural-urban divide is, and that's not going to be good for the country.
So the fact that a
long-term.
Seattle or a Denver or some of the more affluent cities are doing the pre-K, it's not something you think can on a mass basis be absorbed by cities as opposed to bigger governmental levels.
Here's where mayors have to be fiscally responsible. You can't have something for nothing. Somebody's got to pay for it. Nothing's free. And those are the things that guide what I do as the mayor. So there may be some things that I think are absolutely imperative, that are right, but that we can't afford. And I have a bunch of legislators who are from New Orleans, by the way, that insist on letting the legislature tell the city of New Orleans what to do. This is not unlike a red state telling a blue city what to do or a blue state telling a red city what to do. The legislature can't even balance its budget, and they're imposing, restrictions on us. But let me just tell you what that is. When they impose a mandate on us for somebody to pay, it's a tax increase for a working class person in New Orleans that's already stressed. And that's something that I just push back on really hard. Now, that's a little different from do we need to do that thing as opposed to whose responsibility it is to pay for it. And my council members have been breaking their backs to say we can't wait anymore. We have to go do this. But it is going to cause a lot of challenges in years to come as we try to manage our way out of the system, maintain the stability that we have, and invest in the future where it needs. But I would just say this, early childhood education, universal pre-K, you want to fight crime, anchor strategies for economic development, all of these things are tied into making the streets of New Orleans safer.
Your new book, which is out, this week, is it? In the Shadow of Monuments? In Shadow of Statues.
The Shadow of Statues.
Riveting personal and political memoir, a terrific description of all of the, which we'll come to in a minute, of the recounting of the fight, the battle, which I think, as you say, surprised you in its ferocity, ultimately.
I was a little naive.
Before we get to that, though, let me ask you, you describe the massive charter school experiment in New Orleans, quote, you say it has been an unparalleled success. Why do you feel that way?
Well, that's a very controversial statement.
Yes.
But I want people to remember what it was like before. If you were not in this city before, how many educators do we have that are in the city that were here before? You remember, Bill Capo, y'all know who Bill Capo is? Bill Capo is the pothole guy. Before he was on me about potholes, every day going out and say, oh, there's a pothole, Mayor, please come fix it, hundreds of thousands of them. What Bill Capo used to do is take his camera every day and go into schools. And the walls were broken, the plaster was broken, the bathrooms were broken, the kids didn't have anywhere to wash their hands. It was awful. And by measures that were objective, 67 to 70% of the schools were failing, which meant our kids had no chance. And so in comes really Governor Blanco, who was a Democratic governor, along with Mary, Senator Landrieu, and they said, we got to find a new way. And we started thinking about this charter model. Now, what we found out quickly was that was a lightning ride. The lightning ride used to be about vouchers. Then it was a fight between vouchers and public schools, and then there are things he's called public charter schools. And I think what I think I learned, and I hope I learned it correctly, is that the nature of the school, public, private, or voucher, or private Catholic, didn't matter as much as what was actually happening in the building. And I think we learned that in any one of those schools, in any one of those governing models, that if there was a strong principal that had the freedom to hire great teachers based on what the teachers knew and not who they were related to on the school board, and that they weren't worried about who was getting a toilet paper contract, or they weren't stuck on the employer-employee relationships, that kind of principal with that kind of team, with some kind of parental or grandparent or aunt or uncle involvement in some form or fashion, and they had high standards, and they had some kind of accountability measures that were actually good accounting measures, because they're not all equal. In that instance, what you saw was kids' performances getting better. And what we were concerned about was the dropout rate, and of course the suspension rate. So I thought that the numbers reflected that the schools and the kids are doing much better. When you go into schools now, if you're a politician and you got good sense, and you walk into a school, mostly if you look into a child's eyes, you can tell right away whether the light's off or whether the light's on.
Let me ask you, though, because the graduation rate is much higher than it was before Katrina, but it has peaked and has been moving back down in the last several years. What's happened?
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit?
No, but I mean, that's like saying, God, you did great, and now you're kind of going back, it's terrible. No, you did great, and you're sliding back. Let's figure what that is and make it go back again. I don't think we know, again, I'm a data junkie.
Right.
And I think that we ought to do a deep dive on this before we decide that we're going in the wrong direction. I mean, first of all, we have a long way to go. I think my numbers are off a little bit, but I think the number of failing schools that we have in the city has dramatically declined. Somebody in here knows the number now, but it's in the low 20s and maybe even lower than that. And so I do think there are some concerns. There's a couple of things that are going on in the schools that we have to really fix, which is, well, they're not neighborhood-based anymore, and kids are stressed because they have to travel so far. Busing, and then how we handle special ed kids, right? And we don't do that well. We don't actually do that well anywhere in America where we handle our special needs kids, and I think that's pretty universally true. It is also true that in most of our educational systems across America, we're not really that good. That we all need to be better, and we're not really keeping up, especially in math and science, art, all of the STEM stuff. And some of that was because of the low expectations. But I can tell you this, all of our kids that are in STEM now, or in STEAM, that Dr. Mackey is running for us in the NORD programs, these kids are blowing it off the charts. And I just know, I know this, I'll fight anybody in the country on this, not Biden. I don't want to fight, beat me up. I don't mean fight like that. I'm going to let Trump and Biden do that. But I would battle on behalf of the kids in New Orleans who I think are as smart and as fast as anybody in America. And we've had a lot of people telling us that we're just not smart, and that's just not true.
Let me ask you about a couple other areas in the time we have left. In your work in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, you have been touring some of the cities that have been hardest hit by natural disasters.
Yeah.
You've been in Miami, you've been in Houston, you've been in Key West, obviously.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. New Orleans, from Katrina, is right at the top of that list. As the climate continues to change, are we going to be able to save all of the coastal cities where people now live? And if so, what will it take to do that?
Why you want to ask me that question from all my people?
Yeah, I mean, can we?
Well, can I quote the Dalai Lama?
You can quote the Dalai Lama, yeah. I don't think there. I'm not sure he's that near a coast, right?
The Dalai Lama
would be a little less coastal.
I did not say this, and I don't adopt this theory. But we were all in distress, obviously in great anxiety about our city, and the Dalai Lama came to visit us, which was a great blessing. John Lewis was with him, and some brilliant person in the audience said, "What advice do you have for us that live in this low-lying area?" He says, "Well, if you live low and it's wet, go high." And then we were like, "No, that wasn't the answer that we wanted."
Yeah.
But let me again try to be forthright about this. First of all, climate change is real, and it is contributed to it mostly by human action. And unless we reverse that, we can expect the same things that are occurring to occur, which means the sea level's rising. I mean, this is like first grade stuff. But New Orleans has more problems than just climate change. We have a couple of different things going on. We have subsidence because we live on soft stuff, and it keeps going down. And the other thing we have is the oil and gas industry, which helps provide a lot of the fuel for the rest of the country. And the oil and gas companies have cut slices in the marsh. And because we are protecting the rest of the country by imports and exports along the Mississippi and have levied the Mississippi, and those levees hopefully will never break, the sediment is not going back into the marsh and replenishing the marsh. What is the consequence? Consequence is the land is going away. And right now, I don't know what the metric is. It used to be 100 yards every 40 minutes, but I think that that's exacerbating and it's going quicker. This is not a guess. This is a mathematical calculation. If we don't do anything and those forces continue to operate, the city of New Orleans, as you know it, will have water lapping up against its levees by the end of this century. That's kind of the way it's going to work. And so we have to think about how to build smartly and differently. Now, whether people should be relocated or not is a different issue. Right now, we're actually locating an American Indian community from in the lower coastal parishes, but they're only going up to Houma. That's not that far. I mean, you may see, there was an article that was a little bit interesting but scary. I didn't really believe it, but then I didn't know enough not to believe it, that said that Austin and Baton Rouge, will be the line in 100 years. So, I mean, that's a lot for us to think about. So we have a couple of different options. We can spend a lot of money getting smarter, pushing off the water. We can concede the fight and move to higher ground. Or we can just really do really smart things now and prepare ourselves for what we know is coming our way. It should not be a surprise to us, anybody in here, that we're going to get hit by another hurricane. Like, that's going to happen. Can I predict that for you?
Yeah. So there are parts of
So get ready for it.
There are parts of coastal cities that you think may not be able to be defended.
I think that you can't. I think people hate to hear that. I don't know exactly where they are. But the other thing, too, is around the United States of America, 85% of the people, I think, live in areas that are subject to the coast. We just get bent out of shape here when people say we're ignorant people because we live where we live, when cities like Miami and New York City are much more vulnerable than we are.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't beat the people up in New York because Sandy hit them and said it's because they drink too many hurricanes. We didn't do that. We love them, and we wanted to help them. As a matter of fact, we went up there to help them. The bigger point of this is that the whole nation is involved in this, and we are all at risk. And we have to think about where we build and how we build, and when we build back in sustainable ways. And then finally, this idea that you can live against the water. I think the Dutch have taught us that it's smarter to try to live with the water. So maybe instead of building levees alone, you build dikes and dams and you give places for the water to go. You have permeable pavement. There are lots of other smart things that we could do. And in the meantime, we should do what we can do to reduce the number of emissions that all of us help create while simultaneously try to keep the economy going. Now, I know some people think this is a zero-sum game. I don't necessarily see it that way, but if we're going to transition to new kinds of fuel, this is what we don't want to do. Just cut people off and say there's no way for you to feed your family tomorrow. We have to have some kind of transition from where we are to where we're being. And the city right now is dealing with that issue with the new power plant that just got greenlit by the city council about how that may not be the perfect thing, but it's better than what we have right now. And unless you can show me something on how we can transition to that, help me get from here to there. Because when you don't have a plan to get from here to there, the people that are in those jobs now look at you and say, you don't see me and you can't hear me, and so I want to go vote for somebody that I shouldn't have voted for that's causing us problems.
You wouldn't have anybody in mind with
no,
that?
I don't. No. I'm just saying.
Right, let me let's do. I know the mayor has pretty
anger and frustration.
Hard timeline, but let's do a quick question here, if we have
anybody.
One. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Mitch. One of the issues you talked about a little bit was mental health. Following Katrina for a year or two, we talked a lot about mental health. We talked about PTSD. Our prisons are filled with people who are mentally ill. We've got kids who have experienced years of trauma, who, a 20-year-old today was 8 years old then. I understand what you're saying about the Republican federal government and how much money are we really going to see for mental health. But I really think it's one of the bigger issues that we as a community have got to try to wrap our arms around. I'm not saying we're not all trying to, but I think the only time we talk about mental health in our country is when someone gets hurt or killed.
Right. Well, I didn't limit my criticism to Washington and the Republican. I'm talking about all of them. I mean, Washington is like, that's not our problem until there's a major problem, and then they're on the street saying this is a federal issue. Yeah. So every time there's a shooting, the senators and the congressmen show up, and then we say, well, we need money to help. They go, oh, that's local, that's not federal. And so all of this is all of us. And the way it works best, putting ideology aside, is when the federal government shows up when and where it's supposed to, and the state shows up, and locals. If someone doesn't show up, somebody else has to do somebody else's job. And I think one of the great, I actually missed this after Katrina, was the mental and psychological devastation and how upended we all felt after Katrina. If you haven't gone through this is really, it may be hard for me to explain, but most of us get up every day and we assume the earth is going to be under us and that your doctor's office is going to be there and your school is going to be there. And when it's gone, it really kind of freaks you out. and you get back because you have to be strong, but it has an unnerving consequence that lasts for a long time. And I know I miss this with my kids, because my kids, we were all together and we were there, but my daughter, my oldest daughter, for example, lost her entire senior year. And I don't think I fully appreciated the impact that had on her with not being with her friends and her social network. And I think now, as Jim said, these kids that were 8 are now 18, and some of them are acting out, and we're trying to figure out why. So on the issue, and we see this, of course, it's playing out across America, across all classes and races on opioid addiction. And interestingly enough, I'm listening to Washington, and I'm thankful that they just put $4 billion up, which is a drop in the bucket for what we need, but I'm thankful that they took a good step. But let me give you a good example of how you can rob Peter to pay Paul, or hide, the nut under the walnut when they're moving it around. In order to fight opioid addiction, if you listen to the experts, they say you need prevention, and then you need treatment, right? Those are two things that are important. You also need Narcan when somebody, is in the worst set of circumstances, and you need a whole bunch of other stuff. But just on those two things. So Congress says, we're coming to the rescue on opioid. We're going to put some money up. But simultaneously, though, in the tax bill and in their assault on Obamacare, they took away the funding for the two things that you need actually to provide the treatment. So let me give you an example. Odyssey House, which is one of our great providers that does just heroic work, and they're saints, they are just right now trying to open up a treatment facility on Broad Street in New Orleans, which is less than 2 minutes from here. It's an old car dealership, and they needed the money to renovate the property. Well, the federal historic tax credit is the financial tool that they are using, but Congress took away that historic tax credit, so the investments in buildings and the ability to do it goes away. So that's part A. Part B, most of the people that they're treating right now are being treated because of Medicaid expansion.
Yep.
And if you didn't have Medicaid expansion, you can't do it. So all of a sudden, here comes $4 billion from the top, Superman's coming in, but on the bottom, Robin's taking the wheels off of the car. Batman, I should have said Batman's coming in and Robin. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm a little old. I've been watching the Black Panther, so I'm a little off on my. But so what happens is when people say I'm going to solve the problem, and you say when you give me one thing and you take away another, you stay even where you are. So if they want to take a holistic approach to this, a non-ideologic approach, what they want to do is use data, figure out what the strategy is, fund the strategy, measure its success, and then figure out whether or not you want to keep going.
I know you've got to go do your day job.
I do.
But let me ask you real quickly.
I have to go kick off the Jazz Fest. I mean, y'all want me to do that, right?
You write.
You do want me to do that, don't you?
You write very eloquently in the book about the struggle over the statutes. As we've been talking about all morning, the country is going through.
Well, it's a discussion about race.
Yes, I was going to say, the country is going through an historic demographic transformation.
Yeah.
And as we can see, not everybody's happy about
But not our
it. And there's
first
a lot
one.
of tension about it.
But not our first one.
Not our first one.
This is not the first time. I mean,
So
when the
talk
Italians...
about what you learned in that experience that might be relevant to helping
it's just
the
not,
country get
this
through
is
what
not,
it's going
first of all, it's the hardest thing that we ever do is talk about race in America. And everybody knows that by 2040, we're going to have a new majority, as though somehow that's like a zero-sum game. I mean, the whole point throughout the entire history of America is that we are a nation where our diversity has been our strength. And this is nothing new. This is why this is so surprising. I mean, back in the day, people didn't like Italians, and they didn't like the Irish, and they didn't like the Catholics, which I happen to be one of them. And all of a sudden now, things are changing and people are feeling upended, but it's going to be okay. And the reason you know it's okay, this is where New Orleans shines. I mean, we're really good at this. We're really getting along pretty well. I mean, in this city, notwithstanding the upset about the monuments, most of those people were not from the city. They didn't live in the city, and they acted like they could do what they wanted with the property in the city when the people of New Orleans wanted to do something different. So in its essence, this was really just a property dispute. It really, in its essence, when you strip it all away, should you have a right to do with the property that you own? Now, for people that are really conservative, they should understand that because they spent a lot of time making sure the Constitution protected private property rights, except when people wanted to do something with their own property that you didn't like. So that's like first. And then the second part of it is, and I feel more strongly about this today than when I started this, is that when you have vestiges of racism, and that is what those statues were. Those statues were not put up to revere those individuals. They were put up to send a message to the African American community. These are not my words. These are their words. These are their words, all right? And I just think in the 21st century, we ought to be able to state really clearly in this country that the Civil War was about destroying the United States of America for the cause of preserving slavery, and that the Confederacy was on the wrong side of humanity. I can certainly understand people saying to me, how can I have a conversation with you about reconciliation if you can't acknowledge that simple historical fact? And then now that you do that, now let's talk about all the other things that we need to work on together, because essentially, and this is what I wanted to say about Dr. Francis and my daddy, they were two little boys, 19 years old in school, they were friends. And when I asked my dad, who voted against the segregation package and got death threats when he was 29, had 4 kids at home, was scared to death, I said, you know, why did you fight so hard for Norman and Blanche and all of their kids, who were all smarter and faster and better than Moon and all of his kids? Why did you fight for them? He said, I wasn't fighting for Norman. I said, really? He goes, I was fighting for me. And I said, well, explain that to me. He said, Norman made me better. He said, and when the world made it impossible for us to be together, he goes, we were less. And he said, so yeah, I was fighting for Norman, figuratively and generally, but it was just as much about all of us. And I would just say this, New Orleans, if we don't do anything else well, we demonstrate to the rest of the world how beautiful diversity is and how much better we are, because out of many we are one. That's what we are. And I'll argue with anybody in the country about that. And that's what the book is about. All right, I got to go.
Mr. Mayor,
thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
All right.
Great. So I am all that stands between you and lunch, so I'm going to be very brief right now. First, I want to say thank you to Mayor Landrieu and to all of our speakers and to Ron and Allison for a terrific morning. Thank you all very much. I have to say I learned something. As a native Chicagoan, I've been saying New Orleans, and I've been smug that I'm not saying New Orleans, but now I learned from the mayor that it's New Orleans. There's a whole new pronunciation out there for me. Big congratulations to this year's winners of the Renewal Awards and runners-up. You guys all do amazing work, and we're so proud of you for becoming winners of the awards, and we know that the work will continue. So thank you for being here. And a major thank you, of course, to Allstate, to Cynthia and her colleague, Tara Llewellyn, for making this morning possible and for supporting the Renewal Series and the Renewal Awards for all these years. We love working with them. And finally, and especially my thanks to all of you for spending so much time with us, 3 hours, a lot of time to give. And we're really pleased and excited that you spent the morning with us. I hope you found the program to be useful and maybe even inspiring. I have 3 very quick requests before we wrap. First, you'll be getting an email from me asking for feedback on this program. You can avoid all the screen time and instead fill out the form that might have been on your chair when you came in and leave it with somebody from the Atlantic. Your feedback does help us make future programs better, so please do take a minute either here today or by email. Second, we invite you to sign up for the Renewal Project newsletter, and you can do that out by the wall in the lobby here, and you can hear more about the great work that we're doing through the Renewal Project in a regular newsletter. And lastly, we are not done. We invite you to join us for lunch as we celebrate the Renewal Awards winners. They'll be out there, and you can speak with them and learn more about their work and talk to your colleagues who spent the morning here. So that starts right now outside those doors. Please stick around, and thank you again for being here.